Chapter 1134. The advantage of the system elf was that the things that existed in Duque's memory before, even if Duque himself had completely forgotten them, as long as they existed in the depths of his memory, the system elf would be able to dig them out. The system elf would be able to dig out the Milan Fashion Week's new product launch that he occasionally caught a glimpse of on television. The system elf would also be able to dig out the Swarovski man-made crystal ornaments that he had seen on the roadside. The stingy Duque could not bear to give Onyxia real diamonds. Duque casually made a batch of glass ornaments that were specially made to trick people, who knew that it was as if a magical switch had been opened. With the small rewards of new clothes and fake diamonds, the Black Dragon Princess was obviously more cooperative with the training. Even if she made a mistake and was spanked by Duque with a board, she would cry and accept it willingly. What was even more amazing was that she still retained a faint resistance and a strong sense of shame. She still refused to put a collar on her dragon neck. The reins only symbolize that I have been conquered and lost my freedom. The collar represents that I have lost myself and become a brainless thing like a dragon. Make your choice, my master. No matter which one it is, it does not mean that I have given up the choice to resist. The only difference is which one has a smaller probability. Onyxia said stubbornly. Duque patted her head, but in the end he did not put the collar on her. It was purely because Onyxia's reigns had more historical significance. More than a month had passed. It was April 2nd, 21 years after she stepped into the dark portal. For Onyxia, the previous life of scheming against each other, toying with the human nobles in the palm of her hand, creating conflicts and chaos everywhere, and being free and unrestrained had slowly become a blur in her mind. She did not know when it started, but she had gotten used to this kind of restrained life. She had to work hard for a little benefit that she would not even look at in the eye in the past. She constantly worked hard to meet all kinds of novel requests from Duque. From time to time, she would fail because of her clumsy actions or because she did not know what to do, and she would receive all kinds of shameful punishments. She clearly knew that the noble dragon race should never lower their heads to a mortal, but she had unknowingly gotten used to calling him master. She even had to think for a few seconds to realize that her master's name was Duke Marcus. This kind of sinking made her both sad and helpless. It was not that she did not want to resist. As the days passed, her physical condition also improved. Many times, Duke was like a defenseless idiot, like a walking dessert, walking right in front of her dragon mouth. As long as she opened her mouth, she would be able to tear him into pieces. He recalled the scene where Duke was bitten to death by her in the Twilight Forest and immediately revived. Although she subconsciously thought that it was a very high-level illusion, and as long as she bit Duke's real body she would definitely be able to kill him, but after thinking about it she found that she was more and more unwilling to try to resist. What she didn't expect was that not only was she not disgusted by her current state of life, but she also felt that it was natural and even enjoyed it. Why would I be willing to stay in that dirty and tasteless nest in Dustwallow Swamp for thousands of years? With this thought in mind, Onyxia seemed to be walking further and further on the path of no return as Duque's exclusive mount. During this time, the Horde organized an assault team of 3,000 people and began to attack Blackrock Spire from the Scorching Canyon through the Dwarven territory. It was an assault team that included almost all the powerful chieftains of the Horde, except for Thrall. According to Vanessa's report, the Horde should be attacking the upper level of Blackrock Spire where Rend Blackhand was. Turalian's material harvesting team was progressing smoothly. According to the blueprints of the Thorium Brotherhood, they now had enough materials to make a set of fire resistance equipment for warriors, steel set, and 2 sets of fire resistance armor, leather armor, and plate armor. According to Duque, the warriors responsible for fighting the Lord-tier monsters in the Molten Core needed higher fire resistance. However, for other professions, 3 sets of fire resistance equipment were usually enough. When he heard that Duque was preparing to launch a crusade against Ragnaros in 3 days, Turalian expressed his concern. The Molten Core is terrible. In that kind of high-temperature situation, not to mention fighting, just staying there would make it difficult to breathe. I haven't brought a team more than 2,000 steps away from the entrance. Now that the fire resistance equipment is not enough, it's not good for us to launch a crusade. Duque shook his head. We don't have much time. It's the Horde's duty to take down the traitor Rend Blackhand. But I'm afraid that the Horde will fail. Even Grom, the leader of the Horde, will not be able to win against Nefarian, the current Black Dragon King. What about the fire resistance equipment? Turalian asked. Duque pursed his lips. I'll ask Magni to bring in anvil and other materials. Once we have enough materials, we'll start on the spot. All right. You've always been right. I hope you'll be the same in the future. Duque patted Turalian's shoulder. I'll leave the dark portal to you. I'll try my best. In fact, Turalian had the same concerns about the dark portal. The Wormrish Shrine had recently informed them that the Burning Legion had begun a new round of attacks, and it was very likely that they would forcefully break through the dark portal. The crux of the matter was that the Alliance only had so many powerhouses. The Flame Demon King Ragnaros was not a nobody. If the Alliance did not mobilize more than 80% of their powerhouses, they would just have to wait for Ragnaros to turn the entire southern continent into a fiery purgatory. Sending Turalian, who could take charge of an area, back to guard the dark portal was already the Alliance's limit. Turalian, who understood the severity of the situation, subconsciously tightened his grip on Quell Zarim. This action was noticed by Duque. Duque hesitated for a while, but still handed a magic flare gun to Turalian. What's this? What cloud-piercing arrow is this? What I need now is a heroic powerhouse to help me, not an army. Turalian joked. Duque was a little embarrassed. The flare gun was Duque's invention. When Duque popularized the flare gun, his slogan was, "One cloud-piercing arrow, an army will meet." Anyway, at the last moment when you really have no other choice, just use it. Turalian rolled his eyes. Don't tell me that you actually enslaved a demon lord, and then told me to use the demon lord to deal with the demon lord. This time, it was Duque's turn to roll his eyes. It's not convenient for me to bring this guy to the molten core in Karazhan. But these guys all have their own problems. All right. Don't worry, if the demon wants to enter Azeroth through the dark portal, it will have to cross over the bodies of me and 100,000 soldiers. Chapter 1135. On the 5th of April, Duque led the elites of the Alliance into the Blackrock Pagoda. Their goal was the exact opposite of the Horde's. Instead of going to the upper levels of the Blackrock Pagoda, they headed straight for the Molten Core. With Vanessa leading the way, Duque immediately opened a teleportation door for the heroes to go straight to the Blackrock Abyss. Magni, the dwarf warrior, took the lead, and the others followed closely behind. They swept through the path guarded by fire elementals and entered the Molten Core. In order to avoid provoking the lords of the Molten Core, they didn't open a teleportation door leading to the Molten Core. Now that Duque had entered, he opened a teleportation door leading to the Mirror Lake. However, Duque, who wanted to keep in touch with the outside world, soon disappeared. The high temperature of the lava world gave birth to new fire-type monsters almost every second. For example, there was a lava giant that was at least 5 stories tall guarding the entrance. As long as the lava giant was killed for more than 2 hours, a high concentration of fire element would gather, and new monsters would be born from the lava as if it was predetermined. They continued to devour and fuse with each other until a new elite-tier giant creature appeared and once again occupied this empty territory. What was more troublesome was that this was the Molten Core. All the monsters didn't just rely on their eyes to sense their enemies. As long as they weren't pure creatures that belonged to the fire domain, they would all be attacked. A thief's stealth was useless here. The high concentration of chaotic fire elementals in the air cut off all possible magic communication. We have to believe in Duque. He has led the Alliance through so many crises, and this time is no exception, Turalian said. This wasn't based on any facts or reasoning. It was definitely a form of worship, but the Alliance soldiers believed in it. As if stimulated by the allied tribes attacking the Blackrock Mountain together, a large number of Blackrock orcs began to pour out from other secret exits of the Blackrock Tower. Like rivers flowing into the sea, they gathered into an army of more than 50,000 people. Under the leadership of Maim Blackhand, they counterattacked the mountain tunnel and the stone dam path connecting the Scorching Canyon and the Dan Moor area. At the same time, they crossed the barren land and invaded the Loch Moden area. Bulang Bronzebeard began to lead the mechanized dwarven army, teaching Maim that dead orcs are the best orcs at one point. Still, as the hordes of black whelps and draconic whelps joined the fray and the Griffin Legion from Eagle Nest Mountain stood against them, Maim was forced to retreat. The battle fell into a stalemate. On the other side, thousands of fire elementals began to pass through the Blackstone Path in an attempt to break into the Stormwind Redridge Mountain region. With the help of the Dalajan mages, Windsor barely managed to maintain the battle line. The most crucial part of the war was the Watch Castle that was monitoring the Door of Darkness. There was no evidence that the current Black Dragon King was in cahoots with the Burning Legion. If anyone said that there was nothing fishy going on, Turalian would be the first to deny it. Almost at the same time when the two major forces of the Blackrock Spire attacked the Alliance from 2 different directions, the Door of Darkness suddenly moved. A green horizon suddenly appeared in the air. It was completely different from the barren Crimson Cursed Land, but it seemed to be of the same origin. Because it was the ravaging of the dark powers that turned the southern part of the Swamp of Sorrows, which was filled with pests and snakes, into a barren land. The Alliance was no stranger to this shade of green. So when the green line appeared, the patrolling hippogriffs and night elf knights immediately noticed it. Seeing the red fireworks that shot into the sky, the entire watch castle rang with the most shrill alarm. In just 30 seconds, the first batch of 18 Griffin Knights on duty had taken off, assembled, and pounced towards the door of darkness. They were the eyes of the Alliance and also the blade of the Alliance's counterattack. 5 minutes later, all the cannons on the front line were manned by dwarf cannoneers. 10 minutes later, more than 10,000 soldiers from the Mixed Defense Corps were in position at the first 3 lines of defense. This was the result of a long period of ultra-strict training. Today this result was verified by the Burning Legion. Almost at the same moment the door of hell opened. More than 1,000 cannons of various sizes roared at the first line of defense closest to the door of darkness. Looking from the sky, the Alliance's formation looked like a pair of golden wings unfurling. The ground shook violently as the dark metal cannonballs shot into the air like lightning, and according to the most accurate shooting parameters obtained through countless practice, they headed straight for the target. It was a standard carpet bombing that had been carefully calculated. The 1,000 cannonballs rained down and created a terrible storm in the midst of the Burning Legion's army. The demons in the center of the storm were torn to pieces, but even the Apocalypse guards that were flying in the air were blown away by the aftermath of the explosion. 20 seconds later, only the most powerful elite demons were qualified to groan on the ground. The slightly weaker demons were immediately disintegrated into countless pieces like butterflies in a storm. In the second round of bombardment, the Type 3 shell, which was specially aimed at the enemy's air force, directly blasted the remaining Apocalypse guards down, and the cannons that were aimed at the ground repeated the previous steps to annihilate them. Everything went smoothly until a demon lord that was 5 stories tall came out of the door of darkness. It flapped its huge black wings and hovered above the watch fortress. The eyes that were like burning green torches were filled with a kind of coldness that belonged to the ruler of all living things, looking disdainfully at the entire world. It coldly stared at the Alliance's cannons below, and the pair of terrifying eyes looked down on the area 3 times. This huge demon lord flapped its huge bat wings, and instantly countless black light arrows poured down like a heavy rain in May. When the black light descended, the entire area was plunged into a sea of black fire. "Bastard! Come at me if you dare!" Turalian angrily waved Quell Azarim, and kept shooting golden light arcs at the demon lord, trying to provoke it and make it land on the ground to fight him. Unfortunately, after the demon lord sneered, it nimbly dodged the high-speed holy golden light and continued to focus on expanding the area of the sea of black fire. Due to the problem of mobility, there was no chance of winning with the ground force against the air force, not to mention that the enemy was deliberately ignoring Turalian. Turalian, who was helpless, decisively shot the cloud-piercing arrow that Duque had given him. Even Kudrin would have a hard time dealing with a demon lord in an aerial battle. Is it really possible to summon an army with just one cloud-piercing arrow? Turalian felt that it was a bit ridiculous, but he was still trying his best. He was not disappointed. Just 3 minutes later, accompanied by a distant dragon's roar, a huge black dragon shadow approached the watch fortress at high speed. Turalian's jaw almost dropped to the ground. F***CK. What the hell is this? Chapter 1136. After inheriting the royal sword Quell Zalim, Turalian's personal strength had risen to the peak, but he still gave everyone the impression that he was a wise general. This was because he was born at the wrong time, and there was still Duque, who was even more powerful in battle, above him. But it was true that he rarely cursed or lost his composure. This time he really lost his composure. In fact, it was not only him, even many of the Alliance's high-ranking officers could not believe their eyes. Kudrin, who was riding the Griffin King Scarlet in the sky, felt depressed for the first time, muttering, "Duque, you're a bastard. How can I boast about being the Alliance's #1 aerial knight in the future?" The black behemoth flying at high speed from afar was almost the size of a bunker, and the flowing flames under its wings were like a cloud of fire. The turbulence it set off carried with it a blazing golden light, as if it was a blacksmith. As it swept through the sky at high speed, it seemed as if it had been set on fire, drawing a long continuous line of fire. The Alliance's warriors in the watchtower were surprised by its size and power, but the big shots in the Alliance who were familiar with it were more concerned about her identity. After all, less than 2 months ago many people had just fought with her to the death. On the ground, a captain of the Dalajan Wizard Legion raised his head and stared at the hole in the black behemoth's wing. Although the hole had begun to heal and become smaller, its location would not change. Oh my god. That's the Black Dragon Princess Onyxia, right? Onyxia? A blood elf ranger in charge of protecting the captain was stunned. Isn't she the protagonist of Bloody Valentine? I heard that she has been sealed by Sir Marcus. Why, is she wearing armor? And it's the emblem of the Marcus family? Yes. Onyxia seemed to have followed in her father's footsteps, installing a lot of high-strength mithril armor on her body. Of course, this was not because she had gone overboard like her father and almost self-destructed, and was forced to use high-strength alloys to fix her body to prevent it from falling apart. This was purely because Duque saw that her injuries had not fully healed, so before he left, he used the metal stored in Karazhan and made her a set of armor with mediocre craftsmanship to cover her unhealed body parts. That's right, she was the army of thousands that Duque had handed over to Turayan. As if it had heard the whispers of the guards on top of the watchtower, its glistening yellow vertical pupils swept across the watchtower. In the next second, the huge dragon mouth let out a furious dragon roar at the guards in the direction of the watchtower. Roar, tens of thousands of soldiers subconsciously shrank back, and some of the more timid ones even closed their eyes, waiting for the terrifying dragon breath that might descend. However, there was nothing. Onyxia seemed to shout out of boredom, and then without looking back, she directly approached the demon lord that resembled Kazakh in the air at high speed. To unfamiliar species, other races all looked the same. As someone who had fought against Kazakh before, Turalian knew that this guy wasn't Kazakh, but a third-rate apocalypse lord. And the only thing that guy was proud of was his ability to fly. Seeing Onyxia approaching, the guy panicked, and the first thing he opened his mouth was a paragraph of dragon language. Wait! The Burning Legion has an agreement with your brother Nefarian. Who knew that Onyxia would become even angrier, and she replied in the common language, Bastard! When I was being tortured by Duque, where was my good brother? Besides, he is him. I am me. After saying that, regardless of the consequences, she continued to approach the Apocalypse Lord at high speed. Since the ancient war 10,000 years ago, the dragons and the Apocalypse Guards of the Burning Legion could be said to know each other very well. In a pure one-on-one aerial battle, the flexibility and mobility of the dragons of the same level were definitely above the Apocalypse Guards. The Apocalypse Guards could only rely on numbers. This Apocalypse Lord was in trouble, and in one breath, it shot out a huge cluster of shadow arrows. Then a scene that left everyone dumbfounded happened. With her equally huge body, Onyxia put on a good show of God's evasion. Her long neck and streamlined body were like a snake, weaving through the shadow arrow rain at high speed, occasionally taking one or two shadow arrows, but she did not seem to mind at all. In the blink of an eye, Onyxia had already passed through the Apocalypse Lord's 3 consecutive shadow arrow volleys and arrived behind the Apocalypse Lord. Don't look down on the Burning Legion, the Apocalypse Lord shouted. No. I'm just looking down on you, the Black Dragon Princess coldly said. Burning with flames, the huge beheading sword that was at least 2 stories tall slashed out an arc of light in the void. Onyxia responded by breaking beautifully in the air, dodging the attack with her upper body. Then, the terrifying dragon tail that could split mountains and split rocks was like a meteor hammer, drawing a black arc in the air and smashing into the back of the Doomsday Lord at an even faster speed. Ugh. The Apocalypse Lord whimpered, and then turned into a cannonball, crashing into the empty space less than 100 meters in front of Turalian. Well done. Turalian and Kudrin said in unison. The Apocalypse Lord seemed to be very clear about the strength of his land battle. Ignoring his dizziness, he shot a bunch of shadow arrows in Onyxia's direction, then tried his best to flap his wings and fly away. Just when Turalian and Kudrin had not arrived, and the Black Dragon Princess was temporarily avoided, a golden pillar of fire descended from the sky and landed on the Apocalypse Lord's head. A domineering, majestic and sonorous female voice rang out, "Evil shall be purified." Such an exaggerated sacred fire? Turalian turned his head in shock. A huge portal had just opened on the edge of the battlefield, and then a female giant that was at least 3 or 4 stories tall, wrapped in holy light, came out of the portal. She had just raised her huge palm. Turalian knew who she was. She must be the Saintess of Karazhan that Tyrion and Gavin Rad had mentioned. Turalian was overjoyed. He raised his divine sword high and shouted, "Destroy evil." Turalian and the Saintess of Chastity formed a perfect joint attack, but Onyxia obviously kept her distance from them. If she did not occasionally attack the Apocalypse Lord who was trying to fly back, one would really think that she was just a bystander. Turalian suddenly smiled bitterly. It seemed that this female black dragon had regarded herself as part of the evil camp. But that was not important. It was enough to restrain the flying demon lord. Losing its only advantage, the Apocalypse Lord's fate was decided. After taking care of the demon leader, the Burning Legion's attack naturally failed. Onyxia turned around and was about to leave when Turalian suddenly shouted, "Wait! The watchtower needs your strength." Chapter 1137. Tisk. No one would have thought that a dragon with a bumpy face full of cuticles could actually make such a human-like expression. It was pure disdain. Turalian immediately felt like he was baring his teeth in pain. If he had a choice, he wouldn't want to beg this unruly princess of the Black Dragon who had somehow become his ally. Unfortunately, this was the Alliance's weakness. The strongest air force was the Griffin, and even if the Night Elves Hippogriphon Knights were included, they were still at the same level. Reality had already proven that they couldn't shake the Burning Legion's Doomsday Lord. Although Turalian really wanted to believe that the Wyrmrest Shrine's dragon aspect could intercept all the demons, the reality was that there were still demon lords that could fly over. Seeing Onyxia snorting in annoyance and turning to leave, Turalian panicked and shouted, "Duque said that if Piercing Arrow doesn't behave, he'll punish it when he comes back." Hearing the word punish, countless images of taming dragons flashed through Onyxia's mind. She plummeted and looked like she was about to hit the ground. Turalian looked. There was a chance. Since there was a punishment, there would probably be a reward too. Turalian subconsciously deduced. He also said that if you listen to my command, there will be a reward. Reward? I'm the noble and supreme princess of the Black Dragon. I don't care for that bastard of a master's reward. Onyxia pretended to be disdainful and raised her head high, but a few seconds later she squinted her right eye and sent a magic message into Turalian's ears. He really said that? That should be what Duque meant, right? Although a little uncertain, Turalian still nodded like a chick pecking at rice. Absolutely. What is the reward? Onyxia asked. That he didn't say. Turalian had no idea what kind of reward Duque would have. He was a paladin, and paladins could use tactics to deal with enemies, but they couldn't lie to their own people. Saying this much was already his limit. If he continued to lie, it would affect the purity of his holy light. Although he was already the least devout of the 5 Silver Saints, originally, Turalian had prepared himself for Onyxia's rage. Even if she didn't kill anyone, she would still set fire to a cannon turret or something. Who knew that the Black Dragon Princess would blush? That should be blushing, right? The next second, Onyxia stammered, "Very good human, you didn't lie to me. Alright, I'll reluctantly support the Overwatch Castle for a while." Is that even possible? Turalian was a little confused. Alright. I'll prepare it for you right away. The overjoyed Turalian was about to say that he would prepare an empty barn or an armory, but he suddenly remembered that Onyxia could transform into human form and was at a loss for words. By then, Onyxia had flown quite close to Turalian. Only now did Turalian notice that there was a saddle-like seat on Onyxia's back, but it was more like a comfortable chair than a saddle. Not only him, but many of the high-ranking officers of the Alliance on the ground were stunned when they saw this scene. Soon they could no longer see it because the huge black dragon was rapidly shrinking in their field of vision. In just a few seconds, it had turned into a charming and beautiful woman, Countess Katrana Anristo, who had once almost stolen power in Stormwind. She wore a bright red top that was shaped like a morning glory, a pure white skirt with a high slit that looked like a cheongsam, and a pair of crystal high heels that reflected the light of diamonds. Coupled with the S-shaped posture that she subconsciously took, she was a living model. She was dressed like a catwalk, and her aura was more imposing than a queen. Turalian could not figure out what was going on with this woman. Since it's Duque's request, I'll do it, but the benefits that I deserve must not be lacking. First, I want to enjoy the treatment of a king. Secondly, I'm injured and in urgent need of nourishment. Give me 3 whole roasted cows every morning, afternoon, and evening. I want a 3-year-old bull as well as cumin and other barbecue ingredients. A little Bordeaux wine from the Marcus family would be even better. Let's not talk about Turalian, who foolishly treated the Black Dragon Princess, who had been reduced to a mount, like an empress. Returning to the Molten Core, Duque was in a dilemma. This was the real world of Azeroth, so the Molten Core was not a dungeon or alternate dimension that could be cleared in a few hours. It was a huge space that existed underground. How big was the Molten Core? When Ragnaros was angry, he blasted the Red Ridge Mountains into the burning plains and scorching canyon of today. Therefore, the size of these two areas corresponded to the size of the molten core. That's right. According to the system elf's scan and the molten core in his memory from west to east, the molten core was at least 2,000 kilometers. This was really bad. Duque had no choice but to lead his team of heroes in this scorching underground world. Hot. Hot. I'm dying from the heat. I say, Boss Duke, can't you turn up your cooling spell a little more? Gavin Rad didn't hold back his ridicule. Duque rolled his eyes and wanted to kick him into the lava to take a bath. Gavin Rad screamed and rolled away. Then, 10 seconds later, he shamelessly stuck close to Roland. It couldn't be helped. Of course, the players in the game would not feel hot, but in reality, it was unbearably hot. Near the entrance of the Black Rock Abyss, the air temperature was only around 40 degrees, but it was already unbearable. After entering the molten core, the air temperature quickly rose to 70 degrees, and the ground temperature easily exceeded 100 degrees. Even if everyone was wearing 3 or more pieces of fire-resistant equipment to prevent themselves from getting hurt, the problem was that it was still incomparably terrible. The viscous, scorching air felt like they were stirring hot charcoal powder and boiling it into a paste, then pouring it through their noses. It was a nightmare. At the start, the gnome craftsman Gerben was still promoting his new gnome engineering invention, the air filtration mask. Unfortunately, not only did that thing make breathing even more difficult, but it would also be blocked by the thick magma dust floating in the air in less than half an hour. Only a Breaking Dawn mage could easily communicate with the ice elemental plane in the molten core, where the fire element dominated, and direct the ice element here. It was not that a Radiant Moon mage could not do it, but the mana required to use ice magic would be doubled. To maintain their combat strength, Jaina and Solarian could only use arcane magic. Chapter 1138. The only 2 Breaking Dawn wizards in the team became the absolute core of the team. They could expand the range of their ice shield to isolate heat and filter the air to a certain extent. Because Ronan was a generation younger, he was kicked out by Duque to take care of the melee team. The ranged team could only surround Duque in a circle with a radius of no more than 100 meters. It was not that they couldn't go any further, it was just that it was too hot. They were both Breaking Dawn wizards, but the difference between Ronan and Duque was obvious. Ronan had to focus on sensing the ice elemental plane and use his mana as a Breaking Dawn wizard in order to maintain a constant temperature in a radius of 30 meters. It was not impossible to expand it further, but that would use up his mana reserves. This was impossible in order to prepare for the upcoming battle. Moreover, even if Ronan and Duque lowered the temperature to 20 degrees Celsius, the air on Duque's side was fresh and cool, while the air on Ronan's side was still turbid. It was true that Ronan was Duque's disciple. He had thought that he was only a Breaking Dawn and was not that far off from his master. Who would have thought that he would encounter such a situation? A weak-minded person might say that he was an arcanist, but Ronan was clearly not one of them. After all, at the Breaking Dawn level, even if he was not proficient in other elements, there should not be such a huge difference. Ronan chose to humbly ask Duque for guidance. Master, after activating the ice shield, just what is the difference between us? Are there any details about the flow of mana that I haven't done well? Duque looked at the system notifications. According to the air scanning once per second, the current air quality index AQI is 1180. The main pollutant is PM2.5, fine particles. The air quality here is severely polluted, unsuitable for human survival. Ice barrier, activate the tornado form. Activate filtering function. Adjust frost elements to exchange heat in the environment. Introduce thermodynamic formula. Attach excess water to fine particles to form controllable small-scale rainfall. After reading through the large pile of notifications, Duque could not help but silently mourn for Ronan for 3 seconds. Ronan was undoubtedly a true genius. He could use the human brain to simulate certain things that could only be done by computer systems. Unfortunately, he was still made of flesh and blood. It was impossible to perform such fine operations like a computer. Duque had cheated. The problem was that no one else knew. Duque could only teach Ronan solemnly. This is not a simple application of magic. First, you have to figure out who your opponent is. Temperature? Ronan frowned. No. Simply using the frost element to clash or fuse with the fire element would only achieve an effect similar to Frostfire Arrow. Now, our enemy doesn't just have temperature. Duque wiped his right index finger on Luo Ning's sleeve and raised it up. Everyone could see that it was black. Dust? Luo Ning's pupils shrunk. Yes, no one liked to eat dust. In this environment, inhaling the dust in the lungs was more fatal than the high temperature. My countermeasure was to split my ice barrier into 2 layers, one clockwise and the other anti-clockwise. There might be a better way, but for now I found that this is the most effective way to isolate the dust. Ronan, who had already become the chairman of the Dalijan Kirin Tor Parliament, humbly lowered his head towards Duque. Master, I have learned something. Duque was lecturing Ronan as well as reminding Jaina and Solarian, who were beside him. To many mages, Breaking Dawn is just an increase in power. But in reality, the mana that a Breaking Dawn mage can use is still limited. Since it is limited, we need to maximize the usage of magic within the limited mana. 3 huge clusters of magic rose from Duque's palm: arcane, frost, and fire elements. He continuously split, combined, fused, and purified the 3 elemental energies. Just this skillful application made the mage's heroes sigh in admiration. The use and manipulation of magic runs through the life of any mystic. From the most basic mage apprentice to the Breaking Dawn realm, and even to the demigod realm, it is the most basic but also the most useful. Multitasking, and even multitasking, is the threshold that you must cross to become a powerhouse. This requires not only talent but also a lot of practice. Understood. A few mages nodded in unison. Especially you, Jaina. The molten core is indeed too much of a suppression for someone like you who specializes in frost magic. But on the other hand, this is also a rare opportunity. If you can successfully use your magic in such an extreme restrictive environment, then there is no place in the world that your magic cannot reach. Jaina nodded solemnly again. Originally, everyone wanted to give Ronan, the chairman of the Kirin Tor Parliament, some face and leave a portion of them to follow Ronan. However, as time passed, who would care so much about that? They all ran to the area covered by Duque to cool off. William sighed. I always knew that Brother Duque was strong, but I didn't expect him to be this strong. In the field of magic, he is without a doubt the #1 among mortals. William, you don't have to be discouraged. You can definitely become the #1 in another field. Valilla consoled him. This theoretical female blood elf thief had become William's guard after the 2 Williams merged into one. Interestingly, she didn't pledge her loyalty to Stormwind. She was only loyal to William and his children. The alliance was rather united, with Duque as the core. There weren't any small factions. Unfortunately, due to the formation, the melee fighters had to open up a path at the front and cover the flanks and the rear. In the end, a bunch of muscular men were sent to the outer circle, while the inner circle was mostly filled with beauties. However, most of the beauties in the hero team were Duque's harem. Furthermore, the air in the inner circle was better than the outer circle. Not only did it lower the temperature and purify the air, it could even get rid of the pungent smell of sulfur. At the start, the various queens were still reserved. As time passed, Aurelia and Sasha, who were already openly lovers, naturally stayed to the left and right of Duque. Slightly further away were Jaina, Ilusia, Kalia, Queen Shi, and Tyrant. No matter how you looked at it, they looked like 7 stars accompanying the moon. Mograine and the other old ministers grimaced in pain at this lineup, but they couldn't do anything about it. If it wasn't for the blazing lava and volcanic ash floating around them, everyone would have thought that Duque was here for an outing and to show off his lovers. Just as everyone got rid of a twin-headed molten hound, they arrived in front of a huge cave, from which an unusual aura was leaking. Chapter 1139. The fire elemental energy inside was so dense that it was almost solid. Almost everyone frowned. Along the way, everyone had seen the rolling lava on the side of the huge stone path. They had dealt with the 2-story-tall, 2-headed molten fire hound wrapped in flames, and beaten up the 7-story-tall molten core giant made of high-temperature rocks. However, the cave in front of them was not that high, and everyone was still hesitant to go further. It was too hot. That was the temperature where water that fell in would instantly turn into steam. Everyone looked at Duque. Duque rubbed his chin. In his mind, the system was comparing the terrain. The molten core in reality was a completely different concept from the game. This was not a simple expansion of the map in the game. Because of various factors such as volcanic eruptions and lava rivers that constantly changed the terrain, the map in memory was not that reliable. 50 kilometers ago, Duque thought that he had reached the place and sent the first water elemental in. It was not attacked, but it was melted by the high heat. Then he asked Vanessa to scout the way. However, when they entered the lava cave, a small volcano near the entrance suddenly erupted, and the path into the cave was blocked. Vanessa almost fell for it. Well, when she went, she had a full set of thief epic equipment, but when she came back, she was wearing a maid uniform. She used sprinting, while using the tips of her toes to step on the flying rocks like a dragonfly skimming the water. She kept running like a cloud. Boo-hoo. The terrifying Duke Beastly finally couldn't stand the pure and righteous maid who refused to cooperate with him. Is he going to silence her? Seeing Vanessa, who obviously still had some spare energy when she ran back, and even ridiculed him out of habit, Duque was frustrated for a long time. When Valilla came to ask her if she could scout the way next time, Vanessa decisively refused. Please don't mind my words. Taking the opportunity to tease the famous bastard master is one of the few joys I have as a maid. Valilla was speechless. This time, Duque decided to use a different method. Come out, Bran the fireman. A human-sized fire elemental appeared, bathed in flames. Unlike ordinary elemental creatures, this humanoid figure had an extremely distinct human appearance. Not only did it have distinct muscle lines such as an 8-pack, but it also had a distinct facial contour. The moment the pair of eyes opened, almost everyone thought that this humanoid fire elemental creature had its own intelligence. This was because it was actually looking back at every single gaze that was directed at it. But in the next moment, that mechanical reaction made people feel that it was even inferior to ordinary low-intelligence fire elementals. This made everyone say, "Oh," in their hearts. So it wasn't intelligent. Everyone was confused. Duque snapped his fingers and Bran ran into the cave with smooth steps. Jaina asked, "Does this fire elemental have intelligence?" "No. Because if they have intelligence, they can easily be captured and controlled by the other side's commander-tier creatures," Duque replied casually. The mages exclaimed at the same time, "Impossible." There was no other reason other than Bran the Burning Man's movements were too smooth. This was the area of the molten core with uneven ground. Almost every rock that could be stepped on was volcanic rock formed from cooled magma. Although it wasn't rugged, the uneven road was not something that an unintelligent creature could walk on. Without intelligence, it meant that as the master, the mage had to design every movement of his summoned creature. It wasn't just letting it walk. This involved more complicated issues of body balance and so on. A human child had to spend almost a year to learn to walk, and during the countless failed attempts, the human brain was stimulated to form all kinds of complete neural firing, which was how infants learned to walk, which was how they later ran, jumped, and all kinds of other movements. Originally, Duque could have just been a simple reconnaissance fire elemental, and just floated into the cave. Why did Duque have to go through so much trouble? Actually, from the moment he opened the wide area ice shield, he had been consciously strengthening his control and application of magic power. Duque was fumbling. He wanted to find a path to the demigod realm. The Breaking Dawn level was far from the limit. If he wasn't a demigod, he had no confidence in dealing with the Burning Legion's general attack in the future. And ordinary demigods weren't enough. Demigods like the Wild Boar God and the Bear God that had been taken care of by the Void Lords were useless. At the very least, he had to reach the level of Cenarius's father, Malorn the White Deer, to shake the scales of victory in the final war. After a certain dragon taming, Duque had asked Onyxia how to become a demigod. In the end, this female dragon who was born a demigod, only said after a long time, "It's fine as long as your dad is a demigod." Nonsense. I'm the second generation of a god, why do I have to work so hard? Duque used the dragon taming whip to teach Onyxia a lesson on the spot. Duque then asked Aegwin and finally contacted the secluded Medivh. Knowing that Duque had already begun to move towards the demigod realm, Medivh was also very emotional. "First of all, congratulations on your achievements today. As your senior, I am also very gratified. I broke through to the demigod realm while wandering the void. Due to special reasons I can't tell you the details, but I can tell you a general direction that is feasible. Please tell me." Duque bowed his head humbly. "The realm of gods is not as exaggerated as you think. Gods are indeed very strong, but they are also a form of life, so they can be very strong, very weak, or even destroyed. Every path to the divine realm is unique and cannot be replicated." Hearing this, Duque's eyes narrowed. Stepping into the divine realm on planet Azeroth is very troublesome. This is because the easiest and most extensive areas have already been occupied by a few ancient gods, and similarly the elemental areas already have their own masters. Moreover, the laws of the world of Azeroth have already been modified by the creation titans of the Pantheon. Unless your power is already able to resist the joint seal of so many true gods, you can only find a field that you are most proficient in and does not touch the laws of the titans to break through. Hearing this, Duque had a toothache. Going against the creation titans was undoubtedly putting himself on the opposite side of the dragon slumber shrine. It was not difficult to break the laws of the Titans, but it was not easy either. If he had the ability to destroy 4 out of the 5 dragon aspects, the laws of the Titans would more or less collapse. If that was the case, Duque might as well rely on the Burning Legion and suck up to the old man Sargeras. Don't clash with the old laws and territories. Find your own path under such circumstances, or else you will be forever isolated from the divine realm. This was Mediva's final hint. Chapter 1140. Of course, the name Brand was Du's idea. At the same time, it was also a small hope and experiment for Duque. Since he came to Azeroth and accidentally became a pharaoh, he would have to deal with elements. It wasn't that Duke hadn't thought about killing Ragnaros and becoming a god of fire himself. Unfortunately, humans weren't natural elemental creatures, and he couldn't give up his human body to become a fire elemental. Otherwise, what would happen to his harem of girls? Of course, it was a good idea to see if he could get a piece of Ragnaros' flesh. This fake fireman Brand was Duke's first test subject. Brand wasn't a fire elemental creature in the traditional sense of Azeroth. He was more like a collection of complicated programs. If he wasn't a fire elemental, he would be an NPC. Just like the monsters in the games Duque played before he traveled to this world. It seemed like it could see enemies and react to every object in its field of vision, but that wasn't the case at all. Duque used the system Genie to compile a program for Brand. For example, something within a 100-meter radius could be used as a condition to trigger a certain program. In this place there should only be a special monster that triggered Brand's reaction. Huh? Before driving Brand into the cave, Duque had prepared himself for many things, but this was obviously not one of them. Who? The turbid air was filled with the aura of raging flames, as well as the barbaric aura of the ancient desolate lands. Poor Brand. He only shot a fireball into the cave before it was crushed into sparks by the thing that rushed out. 5 dogs? Duke's voice went hoarse. Right. 5 molten hounds popped their heads out of the cave together. This kind of 2-headed lava monster with lava droplets constantly dripping from the corners of its mouth was disgusting no matter how many times he looked at it. Duque's eyes narrowed into a straight line. From left to right. Alessandro's pull 2. Gavinrad, Tyrion, and Magni 1 each. Even though the dwarf warriors had short legs, they were unrestrained. Magni let out a yo-ho, and charged at the molten hound on the far right. Mograine was the most shameless. With a slash of Ashbringer, 2 blades of holy light shot out, instantly causing the 2 firehounds to chase after him in anger. Only Gavinrad and Theon were left. They were the ones who could only run. Gavinrad was so angry that he shouted, "Boss, Alexandros cheated. I also want a divine artifact." If it was any other place, Duque would have told him that there was no divine relic, but it was the molten core. It was the first place in Azeroth where a divine relic could be found. Not 1 but 2. The first was Thunder's Fury, Blessed Sword of the Wind Chaser. Wind Sword for short. There was once a player with a particularly good character who graduated in 2 weeks. When he walked around Iron Stove Castle with the Wind Sword, which looked like a cake fork but had lightning flashing in the middle, countless warriors and thieves just wanted to push him into the furnace of Iron Stove Castle and let him be reforged. The Wind Sword was awesome not because of its own attack power, but because of its despicable, shameless, and stackable speed reduction effect. In the original version, a mage would become brainless after being hit by it a few times. A fireball that could be made in 3 seconds would take 30 seconds. Duque didn't know if he could make it in this lifetime, but if he did, it would be something that could greatly disrupt the opponent's magic circuit. The other one was Savra's Hand of Ragnaros the Balrog. This hammer, which emitted a fiery aura from every corner, was also a well-deserved divine relic. Extremely high attack power, coupled with the unreasonable ability to automatically shoot fireballs at the opponent's side, it was extremely overpowered. Of course, no matter which divine relic it was, it depended on the player's character. In the real world of Azeroth, there was definitely no instance dungeon for these people who were envious of exquisite equipment. Therefore it was up to fate whether or not it dropped the key forging items. Divine relic? As the king of the land of fire, Ragnaros should have a divine relic. Duque replied with a smile. This answer instantly made Gavinrad howl non-stop. Just as Duque was about to say something, he suddenly realized that his fireman Brand was killed again. A huge lava arm the size of a 2-story building suddenly stretched out from the magma and crushed Brand to death. Then the eyes of the giant floating on the surface of the magma turned and looked at Duke and the others. And it wasn't 1 giant, but 2. Molten Core Giant and Molten Destroyer? Duque's expression darkened. The molten core giants weren't afraid. They had killed at least a dozen along the way. However, the molten destroyer was difficult. This guy was considered an elite among the molten core giants. Its unbelievably powerful attack power could directly stomp a warrior with poor equipment or insufficient strength to death. Now there were 7 monsters. Even though this team was made up of hero-level bosses and had enough melee professions, they still felt a sense of danger. Magni use Deity's Descent and take on another giant. Alright. Magni's body instantly grew more than 5 times, and his entire body shone with a metallic silver light. After angering the molten fire hound, this guy intercepted and slammed his shoulder into the 2 giants that were charging at Duke's long-range team. I'll tank all 3 of them. Duke ignored Magni, who was putting on a pretentious act. Instead he looked at Bran nervously. This fireman, who had been injected with a large amount of programming, relied on the dense fire elements in the surroundings to revive. However, when he slowly regained his form, there was another uproar in the cave. This time, hundreds of fire elemental creatures that looked like little demons rushed out. They were Inferno Imps. A single Inferno Imp wasn't much of a threat. At most, they could burn the people around them. However, when hundreds of them came together and stacked their own fire rings, even a warrior wearing a full set of fire resistance equipment would find it difficult. What the F***CK? Does this guy really know how to taunt everyone in the area? Duke didn't dare to be careless anymore. He destroyed Bran with one hand and retrieved all the fire elements and programming he had been given. Even so, the hundreds of Inferno Imps were still jumping and rushing toward the team. At this moment, a warrior stepped forward. He was wearing black iron armor and rushed toward the group of Inferno Imps with agile steps that didn't match his burly figure. The 2 brightly colored swords drew countless splendors that belonged to them in the fiery sky. Varian Rin, attack. Chapter 1141. The Flaming Imps, Flaming Nova, blossomed on William's body. If William wasn't wearing a full set of fire resistance equipment, he would have become a roasted pig by now. Even so, fire resistance didn't mean fire immunity. William's hair started to burn, which proved that he was still in danger. Varian, seeing that he had charged into the group of Inferno Imps, Valera panicked. Unfortunately, she was only a thief. Apart from the temporary shadow cloak that could nullify such a large amount of fire damage for a short period of time, she was completely powerless against so many Inferno Imps. However, William was still crazily slashing and slashing, attracting more of the Flaming Imp's attention with his divine artifact swords. Unlike Varela, who was panicking, Brawl, who was part of the Iron Triangle of Misfortune, threw healing spells like Heal and Rejuvenate at William's head with all his might, just as he had done in the arena that day. All his actions were treating the symptoms but not the root cause. That was because if these hundreds of Flaming Imps didn't die, William would be like a small boat in a stormy sea that could capsize at any time. At this moment, Duke made his move. You guys kill the Molten Destroyer. Duque softly ordered the long-range experts to deal with the giant that had stomped on Magni like a pig being slaughtered, while he focused on dealing with the imps. Ronan wanted to say something but he chose to obey. However, his mind was on the group of flaming imps, and he continued to shoot magic missiles at the giant absent-mindedly. Duque snapped his fingers, and another existence that was theoretically a water elemental appeared. It was an elemental lady that looked like ice. Her ice-blue lower body seemed to have merged with the waves of ice below her like a skirt. Her upper body had obvious feminine features, but her helmet was long and sharp like a woodpecker's beak, blocking half of her face that seemed to be carved. Embrace the ice, she hugged the air. William, who was fighting back against the flaming imps with all his might, suddenly felt the pressure around him disappear. That was because a huge ice coffin had appeared out of thin air, separating him from the flaming imps outside. Bright flames collided with the extremely cold surface of the ice coffin, blossoming into beautiful but impractical flames. It then turned into a fading spark and was annihilated in the air. The next second, feel the power of extreme ice. With the Ice Maiden's finger as the center, a strong gust of wind suddenly blew above William's head. At the same time, boundless water vapor crossed the space and surged out from the cracks in the space. It condensed into a dark cloud about 20 to 30 meters in diameter at a height of about 10 meters above the ground. The Ice Maiden's finger lit up, and a ray of blue light shot into the clouds like a thunderbolt. It immediately triggered the dark clouds above William's head, causing a series of rumbling sounds. In the next moment, countless ice arrows the size of pinky fingers rained down from the clouds. The ground under his feet was made of hard rocks formed by cooled lava. Even elite knights wouldn't dare to say that they could smash the ground with a single blow. However, when these ice arrows hit the bare ground, they immediately left bowl-sized holes. One could imagine how terrifying the power of these ice arrows was. This wasn't the end. Immediately after, Duque raised his left hand and spread his fingers. A blue halo immediately appeared on his palm. Without saying a word, Duke flicked his finger to the left, sending the blue ring of light flying out like a flying knife. Then he flicked a second ring of light to the right. Just like that, he continued to shoot out rings of light in his hand. These halos flew in the air to the periphery of the flaming imps, forming a huge ring that surrounded all the flaming imps. No one can stop the avalanche, the Ice Maiden yelled again. From the ice coffin to the ice halo, the entire area had become a snow-white forbidden zone for life. From the ground formed by lava all the way to the top of the rock stratum hundreds of meters in the sky, everything was white. It was as if Nascent's eternal ice and snow had transcended time and space and arrived here, pouring over the heads of the hundreds of flaming imps. In the eyes of the heroes, a snow-white Optimus Prime appeared. After a series of explosions, all the ice shattered into magnificent ice crystals, and all the imps were swept away. Only William was left inside, looking around in a daze. William took a slight breath of the icy aura around him and mumbled, "So this is Brother Duque's true power?" "True power? I'm afraid it's more than that, right?" Valilla and Brawl, who were older than William, mumbled as if they were sleep-talking. On the other side, Ronan went all out. His arcane missiles could no longer be considered missiles. It was more like a huge arcane light pillar that directly hit the molten core destroyer's chest. The surging arcane energy continuously destroyed the structure of the giant's body. Less than 20 seconds after Duque eliminated the flaming imps, Ronan, who had gone all out, destroyed the molten core destroyer. The huge body made of lava disintegrated into rock fragments that could not move and fell rapidly into the lava beside the road. Perhaps after a while, the unique environment of the molten core destroyer would breed new molten core destroyers. At least in the short term, there would be no need to worry about its threat. After eliminating the factors that could directly lead to the collapse of the team, the next step was easy. After dealing with the remaining molten core giants, Duque called out to everyone, "Gather the 5 dogs together and let them die at the same time within 10 seconds. Otherwise they will revive each other." This was not only the experience gained from the game. Through the system's scan, Duque could clearly see an ethereal energy band connecting the 5 molten core hounds. Unless the molten core hound that had just been killed could be torn into pieces within 10 seconds, the other molten core hounds that were still alive would revive after injecting large amounts of fire elements into their dead companions. Duque's order was carried out. Moreover, Duque, who could see the HP of the molten core hounds, kept using his high attacks to balance the damage dealt to the 5 molten core hounds. In the end, the 5 molten core hounds cried out in pain at the same time and collapsed to the ground. Phew, phew, phew. Everyone was panting heavily. The battle just now had not reached its limit. At least it had given everyone a heads up. Even though many of them had Mount Hydro level equipment, they could still fail miserably if they were not careful. Jaina asked, "Duque, your fireman and ice woman are very special. They don't seem to have intelligence, but they seem to have attracted the attacks of the surrounding monsters." Chapter 1142. Yes. Duque rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought. Then Duque smiled. If your Theramore had 300,000 soldiers and 1,000 warships, what would happen to the Horde? Jaina thought for a while. Probably they would constantly be coveted and spied on. What if Theramore had a huge army of 5,000 griffins? Perhaps even Thrall would have to show hostility towards Theramore? What if the Wyrmrest Shrine became a subordinate of the Alliance, and all the dragons were stationed in Theramore? How is that possible? Although she said that, the intelligent Jaina had already figured out what Duque meant. There was a limit to any kind of emotion. When fear reached its peak, one would either launch a desperate attack, just like how there were always some people in history who went crazy and charged at the dragons with crude weapons, only to be eaten in one bite. Or one would recognize the fact that this was a power that far exceeded one's imagination, leaving only a sense of awe. Okay, so Duke, what you're doing now, which one are you? Duque pondered for a while. It's hard to say. Perhaps, to a certain extent or in a certain aspect, my creation is better than them, so it triggered their crazy counterattack. Is that so? Duque couldn't be sure. The journey to the molten core was still long, and Duque had plenty of time to verify all this. After destroying 2 groups of molten hounds, 3 very special-looking fire demons, 1 big and 2 small, glided over from afar, wagging their tails. William. Facing an unknown enemy. If you were the commander, how would you deal with it? If William was still the personality of Rogash's Ghost Wolf, he would probably have gone up to fight without hesitation. After Duque obtained the magic spell to remove the split from Onyxia, allowing the two William to merge back into one and retrieve his memories, William seemed to have matured a lot. In history, William had lost his father when he was young. After Lothar died at the hands of Orgrim, he grew up in an environment without love and care. His wife, Tiffany, had also passed away at this point in time. If it wasn't for Ando and Rin, it wouldn't be surprising for William to become a loner. Now William was relatively calm. After all, Lothar, whom he admired the most, died of old age and not in battle. Moreover, there was Duque, the former minister of Stormwind. Although Duque was only a little more than 10 years older than him, he treated Duque as an elder. William pondered for a while. I will first observe and try to determine what type of monster it is, and then use half of my strength. Duque didn't comment immediately. Instead, he asked, what type do you think this commander-level monster is? William took out his binoculars, looked at the boss again and replied, although he's holding a huge blade, compared to the giants and dogs we've met along the way, he and his guards are relatively slender. They're a little like the Nagas. Monsters that are closer to melee combat tend to be more burly, so I'm guessing that he and his guards should be spellcasters. If I were the commander, I would pay more attention to spell protection. Duque tilted his head. Hey Magni, what do you think? Whoever treated this seemingly boorish dwarf king as a fool was the real fool. Magni took a sip of the strong liquor in his wineskin and curled his lips. I have no opinion. We can fight however we want. Then he changed the topic and said, however, isn't it what we seniors should do to clean up the mess of our juniors? Duque laughed and turned his head to the other side. Ronan, since William has determined that the opponent is a spellcaster, you should pay more attention. You should pay more attention. I'll leave the magic support for this battle to you. Understood, Master. Ronan nodded. When Duque walked past, Aurelia used the whisper of the wind to ask softly, is it appropriate? It's all right, it's just a Lucifron. Duque said it so casually, but this gave Aurelia absolute confidence. Many times, a name represented a very important meaning. If it wasn't for the terrifying War of the Three Hammers, 99% of humans wouldn't have known of Ragnaros. No one would have known that Ragnaros had any underlings. The Dark Age, when the ancient gods and elemental lords ran amok in the ancient Kalimdor continent, was before the birth of the most ancient night elves. Even Tyrant had a hard time finding relevant information. Now, Duke was able to call out the name of the monster that was obviously a commander-tier monster. This meant that Duque had absolute confidence. Aurelia's smile quickly spread among Duque's lovers. Perhaps this was her absolute trust in Duque. Alessandro. Stay here with me to hold the line. Yes. Although Ashbringer was strong, it consumed too much energy and wasn't good for a long battle. Moreover, Mograine was also starting to age. Even though he was still strong in his 50s, whether he was willing to admit it or not, his stamina was much weaker than when he was young. This was clearly reflected in the system's scan. Fortunately, the 4 Silver Sages had survived longer than history. Most of them were in their 40s and were still at their peak. Perhaps they were a little old as pure warriors, but as holy knights, their holy light was more than twice as strong as when they were young. Duque was very pleased. The battle started with the 3 Windrunner sisters firing their arrows at the same time. The arrows were clearly shot by the 3 of them, but Lucifron and the 2 guards thought that the 3 arrows were shot by Theon, Gavinrad, and Sidon, the 3 paladins, due to their skillful footwork and visual disorientation. It sounded ridiculous, but the common skill of rangers and hunters, mislead, was just that awesome. Seeing the 3 idiotic fellows split into 3 groups, and in less than a minute the first guard was taken down, Magni muttered, perhaps this is what you mean by not good enough, Duque. I feel like this battle isn't challenging at all. It's like torturing those energetic but lacking in combat skills at home. How boring. Duque glanced at Magni's ridiculously luxurious equipment and cursed in his heart, if I'd known this would happen, I wouldn't have brought so much good equipment for you when we went back to the War of the Ancients. Suddenly the system genie let out a sharp alarm. On the way they came, a huge commander-level figure suddenly appeared. On the other side, in the distance behind Lucifron, dust rose into the air. Chapter 1143. Duke's pupils constricted in an instant. Not only was he staring at the huge figure, but he also seemed to be looking into the distance through space. He suddenly sighed. It was true that the Alliance's hero team, which had accumulated a lot of top-grade equipment, had a huge advantage over the bosses in the Molten Core. Perhaps an advantage could bring them victory, but they had to admit that the advantage they had now was not overwhelming. If Duque could split open Azeroth with one move, destroy the distorted void with 2 moves, and destroy the entire universe with 3 moves, then the Burning Legion and the Ancient Gods would have nothing to do with this world. No matter how strong the hero team was, it would still take a lot of time and effort to deal with these bosses. The prerequisite was that the bosses in the Molten Core would line up for them to kill. Now it seemed that this was not the case. That's right. The Molten Core's territory was bigger than Duque had imagined. According to his original plan, each boss was about 100 kilometers apart. Without prior arrangements, this distance alone would be enough for Duque's hero team to defeat all 10 bosses one by one. At this moment, not only had the second boss, Magmadar, rushed over with a large group of molten demon hounds. The third boss, Gehenna's, who was at least 200 kilometers away, had also rushed over. It would be an insult to the intelligence of Duque and the other heroes to say that there wasn't a mastermind. There was only one person who would do this, Majordomo Executus, who was in charge of the affairs of the Molten Core while Ragnaros was asleep. The heroes at the front could not maintain their focus. They kept looking back to see if Duque had any new instructions. Facing everyone's gazes, Duque's face turned green. Then he suddenly laughed. That's right. Our enemies aren't idiots. If a group of strong people can't even find out about their underlings in their own territory, then it can only mean that the famous Fire Demon King is getting weaker and weaker. His smile gave everyone a sense of confidence that was almost unfounded. It wasn't because of clear intelligence, nor was it because of a clear comparison of strength. It was purely because of Duque's personal charisma. William suddenly felt an indescribable sense of envy when he saw that everyone had unconditionally trusted Duque based on his battle achievements. He thought to himself, it would be great if I could be like Brother Duque and gain the trust of so many powerhouses, to the point of risking their lives. Brawl, who was beside William, saw through his thoughts and whispered, "Focus on what's in front of you, William. You're younger than him. You have more room to grow. Valilla and I both believe that you will become a greater man in the future." He had to be patient. The alliance was huge and no one could support the entire alliance by themselves. Not to mention supporting a world. The Night Elf Druid's consolation made William feel much better. In a fit of rage, the 2 divine weapon swords turned into 2 streaks of dazzling flowing light, and crazily slashed at Lucifron's second guard. Duque had already given his orders. He first pointed at the huge hound behind Lucifron and said, "Magni, you carry that big dog. Be careful, the Dog King should know, fear, like the puppies. Benedictus and Sally, you take care of the dwarf. Alexandros and Tyrant, do your best to clear the hounds." Understood. The heroes replied in unison. Mograine asked nervously, "What about the fellow behind?" Duque smiled and said, "I'll go play with it." To be honest, be it the Molten Hound King Magmadar or the red-skinned fire demon boss Gehenna's, they weren't that terrifying when they were alone. Thinking of the Hound King's group fear and Gehenna's rain of fire, even the heroes would suffer heavy casualties if they were to meet up in such a chaotic situation. This was something Duque didn't want to see. Life and death were inevitable, and Duque couldn't force his will on others, such as dragging back Lothar who had died of old age. However, Duque didn't want to see his old friends of 20 years die in battle because of his misjudgment. As a commander, he had to make all sorts of decisions at any time. Because in times of crisis, making the wrong decision was better than doing nothing at all. When the heroes saw the reserve team break through the crowd and run towards the huge dog-like leader, they began to feel nervous. When they realized that Duque was actually going to face the boss alone, everyone was so nervous that their hearts almost jumped out of their chests. "Duque." Sasha's voice was trembling. Duque waved his hand. "I'm fine. I won't die. However, if you guys can't get here in 15 minutes, my invincible reputation will be ruined. I'll show you in 10 minutes. Sylvanas' strong and gentle face seemed to twitch. Duque noticed that as she spoke, her hand speed had increased by more than 50%. Not only that, but every arrow she shot was like a cruise missile, drawing obvious arcs in the air and accurately shooting into the gap between Lucifron's scales. Lucifron screamed in pain, and his fierce eyes turned to look at her. However, just as he raised the huge spear in his right arm and was about to rush at Queen Sylvanas, Theon smashed Lucifron's head with sanction. The holy hammer stunned the fire demon leader for a short time. "Your Majesty, don't let it run around, okay? It's hard for us to catch up." The honest Theon almost cursed. Well, Queen Sylvanas was a little upset. Duque flashed past her and patted her on the shoulder. Don't worry. It's not that serious yet. With that, Duque used blink and appeared 200 meters away. Umph. Queen Sylvanas continued to fire with all her might. This time, the Empress Dowager was so angry that she couldn't say a word. Because almost every arrow from Queen Sylvanas brushed past his ear and neck. Even though he was clad in a thick set of epic armor and a helmet, the problem was, it was hard to feel arrows flying at your back all the time. Queen Sylvanas's arrows perfectly matched Theon's every move. The arrows imbued with the power of thunder often burst out at the moment when Theon's hammer was about to hit Lucifron. It wasn't mislead, but it was even better. In Lucifron's eyes, this was a huge boost in Theon's combat power. He had to choose to kill this thunder magic paladin first. The Empress Dowager took the opportunity to look back at Queen Sylvanas, only to see her sullen face as if he owed her 10 million gold coins. Queen Sylvanas was clearly saying, "Are you okay with that?" Chapter 1144. A true warrior would never lack courage. The heavens went left and the warriors went right. Magni Bronzebeard realized the severity of the situation and did not continue to act arrogantly. Instead, he quietly approached the Molten Hound King Magmadar. After carefully assessing his teammates' ability to keep up, Magni began to sprint at around 50 yards away. Under Sally Whitemane's watchful eyes, the two stubby legs rapidly thickened and enlarged, finally turning into two thick silver pillars. The dwarf's famous move, Avatar. An unscientific increase in size. What an unreasonable power. Together with the warrior's signature skill, Charge. Magni's lightning strike stunned the Hound King. Magmadar was not a highly intelligent chieftain. Its two heads dripping with lava couldn't understand how a little dwarf that looked less than a snack could grow so quickly in its field of vision. At first, it thought that it was just a cannonball, but it turned out that it was a silver dwarf the size of a small house that had been thrown at it. This shocking feeling of Mars crashing into Earth directly caused the huge horn on its left nose to crack a little. Arg! Magmadar let out an angry howl. That terrifying howl that seemed to have come from the primordial wilderness sent the two priests behind Magni into a state of panic. They saw a terrifying illusion, and the holy light in the magic circuits in their bodies became a mess. Only Magni, who had long switched to his berserk mode and used berserk rage, laughed. Dogs are the last thing I'm afraid of. This pretentious Magni took advantage of the fact that he was immune to fear under the effect of berserk rage, and said this as a fraction of Magmadar's age. There's nothing wrong with that. What was interesting was that Magmadar seemed to understand and actually focused on attacking Magni. Seeing Magni's huge body circling around the Molten Hound King like a hummingbird collecting honey, Tyron suddenly laughed. Alexandros, can I trust you? The High Priestess smiled faintly like a spring breeze, making Mograine feel that if he were 30 years younger, he might have pursued this night elf at all costs. Mograine waved the door-sized ashbringer in his hand. Don't underestimate the gentlemanly demeanor of an old noble. Tyron nodded and raised her hands to the sky. In the name of Elund, descend. A fragment of a star. Starfall. As the name suggested, it made the stars in the sky turn into meteors and fall to the ground. In fact, this move was not limited to places where the sky could be seen. Just as Tyrant was channeling her divine power, the ceiling of the rock stratum that was hundreds of meters tall and illuminated as bright as day by the flames of the lava suddenly glowed with a black light. It was not natural darkness. It was the breath of the night. Elund's divine power allowed some special beings to break through the boundaries of space and directly descend upon this place. The debris of the stars that was wrapped in the bluish-purple debris suddenly fell. They split into countless tiny fragments in midair and accurately landed on the heads of every molten firehound that was charging at them. In an instant, every molten firehound let out angry barks. Starfall was an attack that covered all areas of vision. Originally, under the illumination of the night sky, Tyron's attack could be said to be able to turn everything into ashes wherever she looked. Unfortunately, this was not the surface, nor was it under the night sky. For the moon goddess Elund's power to break through the molten core's domain and descend here, she truly lived up to her name as a true god. Thus, seeing the meteor-like light falling down and injuring the molten firehounds, Mograine did not care at all as they ran over. Thanks, comrades. Leave the rest to me. Mograine exhaled and shouted. Ha! Ashbringer immediately shone with a dazzling golden light. In a second, Mograine slashed forward, back, left, and right. The brilliant holy light immediately turned into a blade of justice that could wipe out all evil in the world. It shot out like lightning and easily swept past the huge bodies of the molten firehounds. Every thigh that was as thick as a house beam was perfectly cut open, along with the huge abdomen of the firehounds. In the next moment, the molten firehounds that had gathered were already ashes. Fly, smoke, destroy. Amazing. Tyron was just praising Mograine when she suddenly realized that her old comrade was already on one knee, panting. Mograine smiled bitterly. Am I really getting old? 5 years ago when I got this divine artifact, at least I didn't have to pant when I used this move. At this time, Benedictus, who had recovered from his fear state, comforted him. No. It's the environment of the molten core that suppresses all power other than fire too much. Damn it. We have to hurry up. Although Duque is strong, he can't last too long alone. On the first boss side, everyone was also attacking Lucifron with all their might. However, Lucifron's curse kept the mages busy. This directly interfered with the mages' attack output. They suddenly understood why Duque had always emphasized the metamagic specialty, multicasting. Ronan and Jaina, who had studied under Duque, were the best in this aspect. They could basically guarantee that they could dispel the curse of their teammates while maintaining their own attacks. Dispelling a curse in the real world was not as easy as in the game. The effect of the curse was equally terrifying. Lucifron's curse, which increased the mana, rage and energy consumption of the heroes, was the most annoying. But the most terrifying was the curse, Doomsday's Descent. This kind of powerful shadow curse was obviously even more frightening. Not only did it only take 8 seconds for it to take effect, but the increasing fear and palpitations as time passed seriously disturbed the minds of everyone who was affected. This kind of curse was not easy to deal with. It was almost like a tree sprouting on someone's body, directly drilling into the depths of the person's soul. The more they did not deal with it in time, the longer it would take to dispel the curse. Gina Goldsword was just a little slower, and the curse on Valera's body immediately broke out. The miserable Valera fell to the ground with serious injuries on the spot, and was quickly dragged to the back by Vanessa. They all wanted to end this battle as soon as possible, but it was often more haste less speed. Sensing the arrival of his comrades, Lucifron unexpectedly began to take a defensive position. He was stalling for time. Damn it. Queen Sylvanas was furious. Don't get excited. We have to believe in Duque. He definitely predicted our delay. Aurelia comforted her sister. At the same time, near the cave they came from, Duque let out a bitter laugh. This is really a grand welcome ceremony. Chapter 1145. Looking at the scene in front of him, how could Duque not laugh bitterly? A strengthened Inferno imp was just the appetizer. There were also 7 or 8 stone golems whose bodies were inverted triangles. Their lower bodies were a few stones that could float in midair, and they could run very fast, lava surgers. The core was the Flame King with the same inverted triangular body. This kind of monster was the most disgusting. If left alone, it would give birth to children. 1 would give birth to 2, 2 would give birth to 4, 4 would give birth to an endless number of smaller fire elementals, piling up on you until you died. Behind them was the third boss of the molten core, the fire demon leader, Gehennas, who also had 2 underlings. Compared to the first boss, Lucifron, this guy's skin was completely different in color. The rest of his body looked exactly the same to a human's eyes. He had a relatively thin body, a long snake-like tail, an inverted triangular upper body like a male naga, and sharp black spikes that covered his arms and back in a fan shape. This was not what made Duque feel like he was in a dog's stomach. System notification. Unknown vibration detected. Epicenter is 12.5 kilometers away from host. Depth is -3 meters. Speculation is that it is a group of large earth elemental creatures. According to host's memory, the possibility of the other party being the 4th boss of the molten core, Gar, and his 8 oath-sworn underlings is 92%. The other party will arrive in front of the host in 30 minutes, 42.87 seconds. Duque's previous prediction was probably correct. Majordomo had directly piled the first 8 bosses of the molten core over. This was to prevent Duque and the others from having the time to catch their breath. The fire and earth elementals that used fire and earth as their source of power were naturally not afraid of a war of attrition. The Alliance's heroes were different. They were all mortals. They would tire, get injured, and die. In other words, if they could not deal with the previous enemies before the new leader arrived, they would be dragged into a vicious cycle. They would have to face more bosses at the same time. They would have to struggle to survive in the face of more terrifying and more complicated hostile skills. Soon, the weakest or the one who made a mistake would be the first to fall and the whole team would collapse. Damn it! Looks like I'll have to risk my life. While mocking himself, Duque covered his face with the hood of his robe and went forward. He walked at a leisurely pace, but at every step he took 2 more people appeared beside him. Mirror reality. After such a long period of training, Duque was no longer the rookie mage he was during the first battle of the Dark Portal. As long as he had seen someone with his own eyes, the illusion he created through the system would be so realistic that even the mother of the person being mirrored would not be able to tell the difference. Every hair on the face, the distribution of blood vessels in every inch of the subcutaneous tissue, and the wrinkles on the skin when the muscles on the face moved. Apart from that, there was also the power contained within the mirror image. Therefore, when Duque summoned the mirror images, the fire and earth elemental creatures didn't even doubt their authenticity. Only existences outside of the molten core would know that the people beside Duque could not possibly be Duque's own people. Because those figures were impressively Ras Frost Whisper, Reggie Winterfrost, Kel Thuzad, various Dreadlords, Abyss Lords and the Death Knight version of Arthas. Duque actually shamelessly copied the entire Scourge army and the Burning Legion's leader into mirror images and threw them out. Although the size was a little off, the leaders of the Molten Core were all otakus who had not gone out for tens of thousands of years. Would they know that the Scourge army and the Alliance were not on the same side? Stop joking. Against those who were not fire elemental creatures, they definitely did not need to be afraid. Duque was confident. Since they were all used to be beaten up, wouldn't it be more amusing if they were the faces of their enemies? Duque waved his hand with great arrogance. Go. Brothers of the Scourge army. Under the multi-threaded control of the system elf, the liches behind Duque lined up in a row and raised their white claws that were so dry that only bones were left. Then, in this fiery hell full of fire elemental creatures, a crack that was not a crack was found, and a large amount of ice elemental creatures crazily poured in from the temporarily opened elemental channel. It was a joint war-level spell. Whether it was the total amount of magic, the independence of the liches when chanting, or the guidance of ice elemental creatures in the various elemental gaps, it looked like a masterpiece made by several great liches. Not to mention the low IQ Flame Imp and Flame King, even the boss Gehennas was fooled. Ogu Nandis. He opened his mouth and said a string of unknown language that might be fire elemental. He raised the huge spear full of sawteeth and pointed it at the Lich Mage squad behind Duque. The show was still going on. The knockoff Arthas raised, Frostmourne, which was not much better than a 50-cent special effect and wrapped in a freezing aura, and shouted in a voice no different from the original, "For the Alliance, charge!" Therefore more Death Knights appeared out of thin air. Under the leadership of Dummy, they charged toward the group of flaming imps. For a moment, broken limbs and flames flew, and roasted pigs and howls coexisted. It seemed that blizzard and frost arrows were endless, as if the Scourge army was fighting the Flame army. It was very lively. Only Duque secretly activated the mage's invisibility and snuck over under the cover of the lively battle. Even though Duque the coward had deeply studied invisibility, the invisibility of a mage was different from that of a rogue. No matter how good the effect was, there would always be a limit. Duque's limit was 60 seconds. Also, just like regular invisibility, as long as Duque attacked or cast any spells, his invisibility would be ineffective. It wasn't easy for Duque to find a shadow and cast a spell. Not as a mage but as a priest, which he hadn't done for a long time, and in his shadow form, he began to cast a spell. This was a gamble. He was betting on his experience as a Void Lord, as well as the knowledge of dreams he had learned from Isra to give his magic an additional boost. Shadow spell? Mind control? Almost instantly, Duque invaded the mind of the guard next to Gehennas. Not daring to go too deep into the guy's mind, Duque only gave him an attack order in the guy's mind as his master. Gehennas wasn't going to attack directly, because it seemed that the low-level fire and earth elemental creatures he summoned along the way had the upper hand. Suddenly he felt a sharp pain below his ribs. Isn't there a guard on my left? Gehennas angrily looked to his left, only to find that the fire demon guard he relied on as a barrier had stabbed him with a spear. Chapter 1146. When an enemy's weapon fell on him, he would never feel such heart-wrenching pain, because physical pain could never surpass mental pain. Fire demons, who were naturally thinner than their own kind, always looked down on their reckless and unintelligent compatriots, such as lava giants and molten hounds, but it did not mean that they did not know their own weaknesses and limits. While they were blessed with powerful spellcasting abilities, they were deprived of further evolution in close combat. The sharp barbs on the arms and backs of the fire demons, as well as the long horns of goats, were actually more like decorations. Even the fire demons themselves did not know how to fight with those thorns. Basically, every fire demon leader would always bring a few of their strongest compatriots as guards. Gehenna's guards had followed him for more than 10,000 years. In this extremely long period of time, he had always entrusted his life and trust to the guards by his side. But now that guy had betrayed him without any warning. How could Gehenna's not be angry? But what he saw was a dumbfounded face. Although the spearhead of the long spear had been stabbed into his boss body, the guard's face was full of horror and confusion. "No, master. This isn't me. Impossible." His incoherent speech and the perfect panicked expression made Gehenna's brain stop for a moment. What was going on? His brain only froze for a short period of time, perhaps only 1 or 2 seconds. At this moment, a familiar yet unfamiliar pain suddenly came from his right rib. It was another powerful stab. This time, it was the spear of the guard on his right that pierced into his right chest. Gehenna's fury immediately rose to the peak. "You," turning his head, he saw a face that was equally horrified. "No, master, The guard on the right even dropped the spear in his hand in extreme panic. Just as Gehenna's rage was about to erupt, the guard on the left exerted an astonishing strength with both hands. With a violent pull, the spearhead that had penetrated deep into Gehenna's body tore open his lungs. When Gehenna's looked to the left again, he saw another dumbfounded face. This time, the guard on the right grabbed the spear again and stabbed it deeper into Gehenna's body. "Liar. Traitor. Both of you are..." Ignoring his guard's explanation, Gehenna's had nowhere to vent his anger, so he had to find a place to vent it. In his rage, he no longer cared whether this was a trap or not. He only knew that the person who hurt him must receive retribution. One claw grabbed a guard's head. Even though his claw still remembered the contours of each guard's face and the 10,000 years of relying on each other were still vivid in his mind, Gehenna's could not afford to gamble, or perhaps he did not dare to. He chose the safest method, and that was to kill his 2 guards. Regardless of whether they really betrayed him or were used by the enemy, they were his greatest threat and weakness. Die. The tip of each of the sharp claws that were tightly gripping the heads of the 2 guards suddenly burst into a ball of scarlet flames. The flames that could incinerate everything penetrated straight into their heads. There was confusion, bewilderment, hesitation, and fear, but in the end, the 2 guards did not resist much. They only spread their arms in vain, like zombies instinctively thirsting for fresh flesh and blood. At this moment, Duque made his move. Duque, who had switched to his wizard form, pounced on Gehenna's while he was killing the guards. He raised his hands high above his head and crossed his fingers into a fist, and a cold and domineering aura burst forth. Gehenna's hideous and distorted scarlet face revealed a cruel and angry expression. "Despicable. I'm waiting for you." He opened his mouth, and a light cannon that was not a dragon's breath but even more powerful shot at Duque. Whoosh! It was a shocking blow that made the already bright lava world even more dazzling. The thick and solid rock stratum was directly pierced through, and a large number of rocks exploded. When they came into contact with the aftershock of the light cannon in midair, they turned into powder and fell down. As the direction of the light cannon's attack was directed at Lucifron, every hero who was fighting could clearly see the scarlet light cannon pass through the top of the cave behind them. "Duque." Kalia cried out involuntarily. "No. This is a good thing." Aurelia, who knew Duque better, comforted Kalia. He forced the enemy leader to use his ultimate move so quickly. This proves that Duque has the upper hand. In Aurelia's mind, she could not help but recall the figure of the unkillable little wizard from 20 years ago. Suddenly, a sense of peace and sweetness filled her heart. Kalia, who still lacked combat experience, looked at the battered and exhausted Lucifron and asked, "Then are we safe?" "The battle is not over yet, Sister Kalia." Elucia smiled bitterly. "Remember to conserve the power of the holy light," Aurelia added. Kalia said sorry in a low voice, and then refocused her attention on the battle. Did Gehenna's flame cannon kill Duque? How is that possible? Putting aside the fact that Duque was a man with an infinite number of lives, if Duque, who had been around for 21 years and had countless combat experience, was still hit, then he could find a bucket of tofu to drown himself in. The one that was hit must have been the mirror clone that he had poured some of his magic power into. The real Duque had already flashed behind Gehenna's neck, holding a staff in his left hand and a sword in his right. Ah! Eat my tofu. In the beginning, it was very shameful for Duque to hold this slender divine sword. It felt like a public execution of some kind of shameful play. Humans? They were indeed terrifying creatures because things like moral integrity were something that one got used to. Now, Duque could already wield Gandalf, the legendary sword of the white-robed sword saint, without any psychological burden. The slender divine sword plunged into Gehenna's neck in one breath, and a holy radiance that was more dazzling than lava instantly pierced through this fire demon leader's neck. The golden radiance cut through Gehenna's neck effortlessly, as smooth as the name of the sword, a sword that cut through tofu. Ah! Gehenna's wanted to dodge, but the residual power of the ultimate skill had yet to dissipate, and he could not move at all. Otherwise, the magic circuit in his body would collapse on the spot, and the consequence would be death. At this moment, even Gehenna's himself was in despair. At this moment, Duque suddenly discovered 2 crimson warning notifications. Warning! You have been hit by the living bomb of the leader of the Molten Core, Baron Geddon. Warning! You have been hit by the mana burn of the leader of the Molten Core, Baron Geddon. Chapter 1147. Duque's pupils shrank to the size of pinholes. It was extreme anger and shock. Even though the system had already marked a huge fire elemental boss 100 meters behind Duque on the 3D map in his mind with an eye-catching red border, Duque still clenched his teeth in anger. He was too careless. He always thought that OL4 would arrive first, and then OL5 who was further away. However, Duque subconsciously ignored the fact that he was in the Molten Core, where lava flowed everywhere, and treated it as an ordinary place. OL5 Baron Geddon was a true fire elemental boss. The lava river, which mortals would not even consider, was like flat ground to him. Moreover, because it emitted a high temperature like the lava river, the system elf's skin only discovered it when it was very close. But it was too late. At the most crucial moment, it had appeared in the most marvelous way. Duque had 2 choices. 1. Duque could protect himself. As long as he opened the ice barrier, the powerful ice elemental in his body could forcibly dispel Baron Geddon's 2 terrifying skills. But then he and his team would have to face the enormous pressure of 2 bosses at the same time. The other was that Duque would continue his assassination, which would likely seriously injure Duque. After all, Mana Burn and Living Bomb were both killer skills that countered mages. Duque could not hesitate because the opportunity was fleeting. After thinking for 0.01 seconds, Duque made a decision. The slender golden sword in his hand did not stop, and the next moment, Gehenna's huge head rose into the sky. Simultaneously, the living bomb that had already possessed Duque was detonated by the angry Baron Geddon. Bang! This was a huge explosion. Roar! This was Baron Geddon's extremely angry roar. His roar shook the cave ceiling, which had already become unstable due to the light cannon, and caused more gravel to fall. Duque. This time, the Alliance heroes who were still fighting Lucifron, especially Duque's lovers, were all shocked. Everyone couldn't help but look at Duque with concern. It wasn't just because Duque was one of the strongest existences in the Alliance, but because Duque was the true core. Duque reported to everyone that he was safe. Without thinking, he urgently sent a mirror image to the main force of the team and raised his hand to the sky to throw a magic flare. It was a giant thumb made of arcane technique energy. However, the reactions of the heroes were very strange. Mograine's facial muscles were twitching. Kalia didn't know whether she should be angry or amused. The other guys wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. Jaina could not help but facepalm. That powerful idiot, that's right. In a moment of desperation, Duque randomly chose a mirror image character to go back and report that he was safe. Unfortunately, that guy happened to be the fake Arthas. Although everyone could see that this guy with half of his head blown up and his whole body burnt black was a dummy made of arcane technique energy. However, bringing back a fake enemy to report that he was safe, haha. This was very Duque. In fact, Duque's situation was a bit bad. Baron Geddon's 2 ultimate skills were used at the same time, directly injecting a very large turbulent flow of fire elements into his magic circuit. In terms of quality, it couldn't compare to Duque, but in terms of quantity, this energy was far above Duque's total magic power. Should it be said that this was indeed a commander-level monster in the fire elemental domain? Even though Duque had channeled all the chaotic magic power into a magic circuit branch the moment he was hit, because the magic power wasn't released fast enough, Duque still exploded. To be more precise, the ice shield that had been poured in a large amount of Baron Geddon's magic power exploded. F***CK. As Duque cursed, the huge recoil blew Duque up into the sky. This wasn't an exaggeration. Duque was really blown up. The turbid wind whistled past his ears, and the scenery in front of him shrank rapidly. Duque wanted to control himself, but the effect of mana burn was still going on. At this moment, it was difficult for him to release more effective magic. Using all his strength, Duque only opened Ice Shield. The moment Baron Geddon's fire elements were expelled from his body. The ice shield was opened, but the ice wrapped around Duque flew straight into the sky and hit the top of the cave. The so-called ice shield immunity to damage was based on the premise that you weren't sent flying. Turning into a big ice block could indeed withstand direct slashes and collisions, but the subsequent impact still required the internal organs of the human body to bear. Duque was knocked unconscious. After removing the ice shield, Duque, who was falling rapidly, roared angrily, "Baron Geddon, you are digging your own grave." Baron Geddon didn't show any weakness. No mortal can offend the great Ragnaros. After that, a string of fireballs was thrown straight at Duque, who was still in the air. Who the hell is Ragnaros? Duque endured the turbulence in his body, and several strong gusts of wind rolled around his body. This was the power he obtained when he stole the storm altar that Ghoul Dan destroyed. He didn't use the power of nature very well, and it was even more difficult to use nature spells in this place where the fire elements were too strong. However, it was more than enough to adjust the direction of his fall. The seemingly seamless chain of fireballs was dodged left and right by Duke, escaping a path of survival and successfully landing on the ground again. Okay, round 2. Duque gritted his teeth. The system suddenly prompted again, Garland and his followers are 3 kilometers away from the host. According to the newly adjusted speed, Garland will arrive at the battlefield in 10 minutes. What? Duque's heart felt as if it had been hit by a hammer, and it was stuffy. So fast. Could it be that Garland also had the form of a lava surger? Even Duque was starting to feel a little anxious now. If the main force was not ready, it meant that the whole team would have to face 4 bosses at the same time. At this moment, the magic phantoms that Duke had sent back suddenly heard a burst of loud cheers. "He's dead, he's dead. We finally killed this guy. Hurry, hurry, go and support Magni." Being attacked from both sides was definitely a taboo for a soldier. Everyone knew very well what kind of pressure Duque was under. Because they cherished every minute and every second that they fought. For a moment, Jaina really wanted to rush over and see what was happening to Duque. Among Duque's women, she and Alusia could use high-speed continuous flash to go over and take a look as fast as possible. But in the end, the 2 female magicians suppressed the uneasiness in their hearts and resolutely gave up on looking back. They were afraid that if they looked for even a second, they would lose the courage to continue fighting. Chapter 1148. Through the feedback from the mirror image, Duque let out a long sigh of relief when he found out that the main force did not come to support him. Instead, they went straight to the Molten Hound King. Initially, Duque had been thinking of nurturing William if he had the chance. However, it had turned into an extremely urgent battle of life and death. Duque was a little sad, but he wasn't surprised. After spending so much time in Azeroth, Duque had learned a lesson. No matter how weak a boss was, it wouldn't stick its neck out for you to chop. That was why Duque had long since lured the Horde into fighting Nefarian. Even if the Horde couldn't win, he couldn't let Nefarian be in a guerrilla position so that he could attack the Alliance's rear at any time. Now it seemed that he had made the right move. If the Alliance wanted to grasp the pulse of fate, they would need to kill at least half of the 10 leaders of the Molten Core. Now that Boss 1 and Boss 3 had been defeated, as long as Duque could drag it out long enough, Boss 2's dog King Magmadar wouldn't be a problem. The problem was the bosses that were rushing over. Duque assessed the situation. Under the simultaneous manipulation of the system elf, his phantom doppelganger and mirror doppelganger had already cleared half of the monsters. The focus was still on Baron Geddon and the bosses that were likely to come. Major Domo Executus, the manager of OL9, was a strategist, but his combat power was not high. Without its underlings, it was just a coward. Old 8 was the boss of the lava giants, Gyurmanj the Incinerator. His huge body and hopelessly slow movement speed made it impossible for him to come all the way to the exhibition. Although Old 7's Saffron Forerunner was a fire demon, according to the scale of the map, it was at least 500 kilometers away from here. It should not be able to make it in time. The appearance of Garland, the leader of the earth elementals in OL 4, was inevitable. Baron Geddon was already in front of him. The only variable was the sixth boss, fire demon boss Shazra. This fellow was a disgusting person who could teleport and cause explosions everywhere he went, scaring people. If it appeared alone, it would not be a problem at all. If it came out to cause trouble while the team was attacking Garland and Baron Geddon, it would not be surprising for the team to be wiped out. Fortunately, it couldn't rely on itself to teleport, so it probably had to run all the way here. Even so, Duke still didn't want to see more than one boss at the same time. Because in his mind, Duke did not even want to imagine the scene of his lover lying in a pool of blood. He could resurrect, but they couldn't. Duke suddenly gave a wry smile. So, the key to not being caught in a pincer attack is to see if you can kill quickly? In the end, the burden is still on my shoulders. Maybe, this is what men are like. Duke's figure appeared in front of Baron Geddon again. A man. A leader. The two enemies, who were hundreds of times different in size, stared at each other from afar. In the name of the Fire Demon King, die, human. That was the Flame Lord's earth-shattering roar. In the name of the Great Alliance, perish, bastard. This was the determination of the Alliance commander. Living Bomb, and Mana Combustion, descended again. But this time Baron Geddon didn't hit anything. The target it locked on, in the first tenth of a second before it attacked, was still breathing, had magic flowing, and had a complex magic circuit. However, after it threw out the ultimate skill, it hit an empty human figure that instantly dissipated, as if its fatal magic had only hit a mass of air. Fake. Everything was fake. After hitting 12 extremely realistic mirror images in a row, even though Baron Geddon was a fire elemental with a high degree of intelligence, it had to start to doubt its own judgment. Where was the abominable human who killed its companion? Couldn't find him? It didn't matter. The fire elemental had its own unique way of finding people. Baron Geddon suddenly roared, "Repent in the fiery hell, human." Suddenly, an extremely standard huge ring of fire, with its conical foot, as the center, spread in all directions at a high speed. The huge wave of fire easily engulfed everything in its surroundings and burned them to ashes. The super high temperature wave of fire even blew up a few lava surges that were running back and forth and constantly attacking the illusion of Duke. The surging waves of flames engulfed every crevice in the sunken cave. At this moment, a figure was forced out of stealth mode. Was Duke. He was bathed in fire, and even the hair on his body was on fire. But he still made a throwing gesture without a care. He exhaled and used the last of his strength to throw an icicle more than a meter long at Baron Geddon. Rather than saying it was an icicle, it looked more like a javelin. This ice javelin, which seemed to come from the depths of hell, pierced through the curtain of fire without any hindrance, cut through the sky, and stuck straight into Baron Geddon's chest. The Baron didn't mind at all. If he could completely erase such a strong enemy from the world with a little injury, it would be worth it. Unfortunately, the next second he didn't think so. Because more Duke appeared around him. Front, back, left, right, up in the sky and down on the ground. From the ground to the huge pillars, from the pillars to the top of the rock stratum, almost every place where a person could stand, there was a Duke holding up an ice javelin. I am Duke. I am also Duke. We have endless Dukes. You stupid guy, can you use your limited power to kill every me? Those mirror images of Duke opened their mouths at the same time, but said different things, almost causing Baron Geddon to have a mental breakdown. It wanted to treat these Dukes as fake illusions. But they weren't. Each of the Dukes could throw a javelin that hurt it. On the other hand, no matter how many living bombs it used, it couldn't stop more Dukes from appearing in front of it. If it wasn't careful, a Breaking Dawn level ice arrow would unequivocally give it deeper and heavier injuries. Similarly, Duke, who poured most of his magic power into illusions and attacks, was extremely fragile at this time. If even a little bit of the overflowing destructive power fell on Duke, it would seriously injure Duke. Duke's face was brimming with a rare smile. This was a feeling he hadn't felt for a long time. Dancing on the tip of a knife. Disco dancing on a grave. Singing loudly before death. In the midst of despair and hardship, he wrote a heroic epic that belonged only to Duke alone. How long did Duke fight? How many ice arrows did he shoot at Baron Geddon before he was killed? Duke didn't even count himself. When his magic circuit became empty, Duke finally waited for the next boss. Duke smiled coolly. Yo, you're a step too late. Chapter 1149. 1 step ahead was a genius. 2 steps ahead was a monster. 3 steps ahead and the whole world could only look up to you. With Mount Hyjal as his base equipment, Kill Jaden's exquisite equipment, and Sargera's Moonlight Grail, which had a magic speed effect that exceeded 3 eras, Duque was able to pour out all the magic that he couldn't normally use up in 10 minutes. Admittedly, Duque's average equipment was 2 steps ahead of the current era. However, considering that he was dealing with Mana Burn and Living Bomb, which were known as the nemesis of all magic classes, it was commendable that he was able to get such dazzling numbers. Duque didn't count, but that didn't mean that the system elf didn't count. In the end, in 601 seconds of battle time, the statistics were 10 Ice Barrier, 5 Ice Bloodline, 36 Ice Shield, 386 Flash. Including the magic clone, a total of 1086 Ice Arrows were equivalent to full power casting. The damage caused was 10 times that of Baron Geddon's own vitality. Right. That's right. 10 times. Duque discovered this problem as soon as he started attacking. In a special area full of flames and lava like the Molten Core, the purest fire elemental leader could recover its vitality by absorbing the fire elements in the surrounding air and even in the lava. In a sense, Duque was even fighting against a small part of the Molten Core. At the last moment, Duque even opened the wide ice shield and pulled Baron Geddon into the world of ice and snow that he had forcibly squeezed out of the Molten Core and killed him. Duque was very tired. From body to soul, every corner and every molecule was full of fatigue. Looking at Jarl, the earth elemental boss that was like a moving mountain, Duque laughed. Mortal. You actually killed the servant of the great Ragnaros? Jarl questioned Duque in a slightly vague but extremely thick common language. Pfft. Duque laughed shamelessly. Sorry? My hand slipped and I accidentally killed 2 of them. Did my hand slip? Careless? Looking at his 2 dead companions, Gehennas, whose head had fallen off, and Baron Geddon, who had turned into a pile of high-energy bodies, Garl could not suppress his anger. My lord will definitely turn you and your race's place of survival into ashes. Garland roared. Hee hee. The earth elementals were all stubborn fellows. It was impossible to convince them with words. Then why did Duque and Gar spit on each other? Of course, Duque could take the opportunity to recover his mana. In a sense, a Breaking Dawn Great Mage was a magical furnace that could continuously produce mana. While they were talking, Duque's magic power had recovered to 3%. If he hadn't been attacked by Mana Burn so many times and damaged more than a third of his magic circuits, Duque's recovery would have been even faster. But for now it was enough for Duque. Without any warning, a Duque and 8 knockoff liches of the Scourge army appeared near Garland and his Oathkeeper brothers at the same time. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. More than 36 Ice Spear technique hit the faces of Garland and his underlings with a series of rapid wind-breaking sounds. Ice Spears was a simplified version of an ice arrow. It could be shot instantly, but if the opponent was not frozen, then the Ice Spears would have no power. However, using it to provoke others was a different matter. Sorry. My hand slipped. An ice spear hit the rough outline of Garland's face. Of course, to recognize an earth elemental's facial features, other than the pair of red eyes, the position of the other facial features had to be discussed. My hand really slipped. Bang. Another shot was fired. My hand slipped again. Bang. Another shot was fired. Sorry, since my hand slipped so many times, why don't I do a manual comedy on your face? Another shot. Duque's hand slipped for more than 100 shots. It couldn't be helped. Someone had accidentally set the ice spear to automatic firing, and one misfire resulted in so many shots. It's hard for me too. Don't move. Big guy, I'm drawing sh*T on your hand. Oh no, I'm drawing a comedy. Someone who was rotten to the core yelled. While being chased by the hill-like Garland, he used the ice spear to draw something indescribable in the shape of a pyramid on Garland's face. If Garland had lungs, they would probably explode in anger. Garland's rocky body was glowing with a layer of faint red light. It was definitely a chore to kill a thick-skinned earth elemental leader. Of course, if one were to simply kite and drag the opponent around to buy time, the difficulty would plummet. The price of having a strong defense of the earth elemental was having short legs. He didn't even know how to teleport and he wanted to catch up to Duque? Unknowingly, Duque and his phantom doppelgangers had already pulled Garland and his brothers apart. After Duque played kite for about 5 minutes, the heroes of the Alliance finally arrived. The 3 Windrunner sisters who arrived first could not help but laugh. This was because Duque was yelling as he was being chased. Then Gavin Rad, who was the second to arrive, was also amused. This was because he saw a line of words in the common language on Garland's huge rocky chest. "I have a divine artifact on me. Come and kill me." After a short moment of surprise, everyone's hearts were heavy. This was because they saw Gehenna's, who had lost his head, and Baron Geddon, who had been reduced to ashes. Even though they were already dead, their huge bodies still exuded a fierce aura. Everyone's hearts skipped a beat. They did not expect that so many people had risked their lives to kill two leaders, but Duque had also killed two. Even though there were not many traces of a battle around Gehenna's, and Duque had probably killed him by assassination, a kill was a kill. No one could ignore the glory of killing the enemy leader single-handedly. If it were not for Duque, perhaps everyone would have been wiped out. The enemy leader's endless tricks made everyone's hearts palpitate even after victory. It was not an exaggeration to say that Duke Marcus was indeed the number one person in the alliance. Everyone could not help but feel respect for Duque once again. Seeing that the paladins who could tank the monsters had successfully taken over the batons from their doppelgangers and tanked the Oathsworn of Fire, Duke simply ordered Magni to stay behind to deal with the sixth boss Shazra, who might appear. He then gave a simple instruction on how to fight the Oathsworn of Fire. Duke finally could not hold on any longer and collapsed into Tyrant's arms. Everyone could roughly guess the relationship between Duque and Tyrant, but Duque still attracted some attention when he hugged her so openly. Soon everyone understood because Duque had fainted. Tyrant smiled gently. "You've worked hard, Duque." Chapter 1150. Duque had a good dream. He dreamt that he was rubbing himself between Tyrant's Mount Hygel to his heart's content. Then in a daze, Duque felt a sense of comfort but also pain. In this conflicted state, Duque woke up. The first thing he saw was Tyrant's smooth and fair thighs. Having a lap pillow was indeed one of life's greatest benefits. Then, Duque saw a scene that made him break down. Tyrant noticed that Duque had woken up and retracted her left hand at lightning speed. Duque had an awkward expression. "Tyrant, what are you doing?" "No, I..." Tyrant stammered for a few seconds before finally admitting her guilt. She looked like a child who had done something wrong. "Don't you always use your Duke Excalibur to make people hover between life and death? No matter how I say no, no matter how I beg for mercy, you won't let me go. It's rare to see such a cute sword today. I'm thinking if I can make your sword longer and tie a slip knot or something. If possible, I'd even like to try tying a bow." Tie a slip knot? What kind of bloody bow is this? Uncle can tolerate this, but Aunt can't. Duque turned into the most ferocious wolf and wanted to pounce on Tyrant on the spot. Just as Duque was about to make his move, Tyrant's eyes flickered. Her pure face and slightly mischievous expression merged together perfectly. She smiled and said, "Duque, although I don't mind, but..." Duque was not afraid of anything except, but. Every time there was a but, there would always be trouble. As expected, Duque heard a commotion. Only then did Duque realize that the place where Tyrant had placed him was not far from the battlefield. It was only about 300 meters away. The heroes of the Alliance dragged Garland's underlings, the Flame Oath men, out of the cave and dealt with them one by one. Then they killed Garland before Old Six Shazra arrived. Following that, the experts of the Alliance figured out Shazra's fighting style and patterns without anyone teaching them. The clamor just now was the cheers of this group of people celebrating their victory. "Ah. Oh. Well, Ragnaros, how many followers do you have? Let's do it all at once. Otherwise, I'll have to look for them one by one." The arrogant short king, Magni Bronzebeard, raised Shazra's head high and stood on the hill of earth elements formed after Jarl's death. He put on the posture of the king of the world and laughed non-stop. "That's because your legs are too short to run," the masked female thief Valera said. The king of Steel Furnace Fort's heart was petrified. No, his entire body was petrified. A gust of wind would blow him away. The heroes of the Alliance were celebrating their victory. The oldest among them, Mograine, sat on a large rock and panted heavily. Tyrion walked over with a smile. "How are you, Alexandros?" very happy, but also a little tired." "Sigh, time and tide wait for no man." Mograine sighed. No. "You can still fight for another 10 years. Tyrion waved his hand. "What's the use of 10 years if I can't use the power of Ashbringer?" Mograine said meaningfully. "Duque told me that light and darkness are actually one. Ashbringer can also become Fallen Ashbringer. I don't want the evil Slayer sword in my hand to become the plaything of evil forces one day. So, after we go back or if something happens to me, this sword will be yours. Tyrion felt like he was choking on his words. How could a true martial artist not wish to have a divine weapon that he could use with his own hands? Duque had Gandalf, the legendary sword of the white-robed sword saint. Turalyon had the royal sword, Quell Azarim. Mograine had Ashbringer. Every godly sword had its own legendary story, which was sung by bards all over the world day and night. As long as there were humans, their legends would continue to be passed down. That was the supreme glory of a warrior. As a noble paladin, Tyrion was envious but not jealous. But when he heard that Mograine was going to pass the sword to him, his heart still failed to live up to his expectations and began to beat wildly. That was excitement. Not out of greed but based on the excitement of being able to better destroy evil. Don't hesitate and don't be ashamed. Your noble character and firm will are worthy of this divine weapon. Actually, you don't have to. Just as Tyrion was about to continue, Mograine raised his hand to stop him. Everyone's pursuit is different. Everyone has heard Duque's hint, but I feel that instead of pursuing a false eternity, it is better to live a wonderful life. I have enjoyed wealth, bathed in the glory of Lordaeron, fought against the deepest evil, and upheld the glory of Her Majesty the Queen. My only regret is that I could not raise my son to be the best paladin, but I have no more regrets. Tyrion was silent, listening to Mograine's almost monologue. I believe that the existence of paladins should eulogize and uphold all that is good in the world. We do not demand perfection, but we must first do our best and set an example for the world. So as a human, birth, aging, sickness and death are inevitable processes. I do not intend to go against the laws of nature. And the noble and pure holy light must also receive a better inheritance. With that, Mograine held the long hilt of Ashbringer with one hand and handed the second half of the hilt to Tyrion. Almost as soon as Tyrion touched Ashbringer, the sword bloomed with a dazzling golden light. That was proof that the divine sword recognized Tyrion as its next master. Everyone looked back, stunned but also gratified. Yes, birth, aging, sickness and death. The rise and fall of fate. That was life. At some point, everyone started applauding. At the same time, before Duque had time to warm up with his woman, someone came to find him. Boss Duque, did you see something like this on the Fire Elemental Leader? The three Windrunner sisters, who were the fastest on this side, rushed to Duke's side. On the other side, Gavin Radd arrived. In his hand was something that looked like half a skull of some creature. The wind and thunder aura lingering on it told everyone that it was no ordinary epic equipment. Duque reluctantly withdrew his claws from Tyron's butt and coughed. Damn you. Why do you want this sword? You're not the one carrying the big guy. A sword. A sword? Gavin Radd's eyes lit up. Ah. This thing is destined to belong to me. If it's a sword, Magni would never want it. Chapter 1151. Hammers are the dwarves' romance. Gavin Radd put his hands on his hips and imitated Magni's arrogant manner and tone, making all the ladies laugh. Duque was speechless for half a second. Also, I can feel the power of wind and lightning on it. It's quite similar to my power. If Gavin Radd hadn't mentioned it, Duque would have forgotten that this guy had also obtained the power of lightning from the storm altar when he went to save Cuel Salis with him. This made Gavin Radd go from being the last of the 5 silver sages to being on par with the other 3, second only to the strongest Uther. Now, if he had the power of lightning and the wind sword, it wouldn't be perfect, but at least it would be a good result. Okay boss, here's the question. You're so knowledgeable, do you know where the other half is? Gavin Radd waved the skull of imprisonment of the Windseeker in his hand. Duque smiled. He smiled brightly. Seeing that you call me boss so smoothly, at this point, Duque deliberately kept Gavin Radd in suspense and didn't continue. Knowing that Duque was trying to keep him in suspense, Gavin Radd had no choice but to comply. Looking at how obedient he was, he looked like a silly husky. There seemed to be a furry dog's tail wagging behind his showy golden butt armor, and he almost drooled. Jaina smiled slyly and leaped into Duque's arms. She then turned to Gavin Radd. Call me something nice. Maybe I'll let Duque tell you the answer if I'm happy. Knowing that Jaina was taking advantage of him, Gavin Radd observed her expression and knew that there was a chance. What integrity. Sell the equipment. Sister-in-law. Sister-in-law. I've bowed to you. This guy didn't have any shame or self-awareness of a holy knight at all. Who knew where that dense, almost solid holy light came from? If this world had one of the 4 great evil arts from Duque's original world, Duque would almost suspect that Gavin Rad's holy light was just a bunch of cheap special effects. Anyway, Jaina was happy, but the other girls were unhappy. As long as one was thick-skinned enough, they would run up and accept Gavin Rad's sister-in-law. Looking at Gavin Rad, Duque could not help but recall the past. Unknowingly, ever since he became a paladin in Lordaeron during the first year of the Dark Portal, Gavin Rad had been with him for almost 20 years. Gavin Rad, who should have died after Arthas killed his father, and even before Uther, was still alive and kicking. Now that he had broken free from the shackles of fate, it would not be a problem for him to fight for another 10 or 20 years. In the past 20 years, Gavin Rad had been with him. He had been a guard, an errand boy. Be it standing guard at the door or being trapped in the void, he had never complained. Duque suddenly sighed with emotion. Ah, time. Loyalty. He deserved to be rewarded. Duque patted Gavin Rad's shoulder and laughed. All right. Since you called me boss for 20 years, here's the answer you wanted. With that, Duque stuffed the other half of the skull of imprisonment of the Windchaser into Gavin Rad's hand. That's right. Perhaps in the game, the drop rate of the items on the left and right sides of this artifact was only about 3%. Back in the game, Duque's buddies could not find the other half even after farming for 6 years. For example, a poor player called Recruit. Recruit? Alright, the important idiot had to laugh at him 3 times. Who told you to always make me work for you? In the real world of Azeroth, it seemed that the 2 core items of the Windchaser would definitely drop. When Gavin Rad put the 2 skulls together, a wave of spiritual power was emitted from the skulls, guiding Gavin Rad. This is... Jaina was shocked. Duque pressed down on Jaina's slender fingers. Don't worry, it's a good thing. Gavin Rad suddenly looked up. There's a voice telling me to go to Silithus. Is it really there? Duque sighed. In a sense, the real version of Azeroth was surprisingly similar to the game. Kalia leaned over and blinked. Duque, what's the story behind this sword? Duque looked at the girl's curious expressions and asked symbolically, do you want to hear it? Yes. They said in unison. That's a story from 25,000 years ago. Prince Thunderin was the son of the Windchaser, Alikir. He was the lord of the wind element, the master of the fury of thunder. He was born on a night of typhoons, a prince like the wind, hence his name, the Windchaser. In ancient times, the creation titans of the pantheon visited Azeroth. The gods were worried about the evil habits of the ancient gods. This was because the ancient gods slaughtered all intelligent creatures under their command and carried out crazy sacrifices. Thus, the Titans sent out troops to fight against the elemental creatures and their evil master. The primordial gods' army was led by the strongest elemental leaders, Ragnaros the Balrog, Therazane the Stone Mother, Alikir the Windwielder, and Neptulin the Tide Hunter. The Titan army was led by Sargeras, the Titan warrior who had not fallen yet. The relationship between the elements and the ancient gods was more of a mutual benefit. In return for summoning them into the physical world, the elements were willing to fight against the titans who came to change the world with the ancient gods. The elements were not united either. The wind and water elements formed an alliance to fight against the fire elements. 2 years before the War of the Dominators, Prince Thunderin defeated Ragnaros. Year 16 of the War of the Dominators, Prince Thunderin fought against Sargeras, who attacked the Realm of Wind. Sargeras was forced to retreat from the Realm of Wind. Year 17 of the War of the Dominators, because Prince Thunderin faced the incomparably powerful Sargeras head-on, Prince Thunderin started to lose his sight and his movements became slower. Prince Thunderin loved the daughter of the wind leader Adulin, the wind-kissing elf Asher. However, Prince Thunderin knew that he would soon lose his sight, and Asher hoped that Thunderin could leave the war with her. Thunderin knew that he could not give her what she wanted, so he did not express his love to Asher. Year 20 of the War of the Dominators, Thunderin lost his sight. In the same year, as an ally, Neptulin the Tide Hunter was defeated by Sargeras and nailed to death on what is now the Black Sea coast. Year 33 of the War of the Dominators, Sargeras fell and betrayed the ancient gods. However, this was not the end of the War of the Dominators. A new war began. The Flame Demon Ragnaros attacked the Wind Realm. The Flame Demon's subordinates, Jarl and Baron Geddon, schemed to bind Prince Thunderin. Prince Thunderin was ambushed by the Flame Demon Ragnaros and his essence was absorbed after he died. However, because Thunderin was too powerful, Ragnaros accepted Jarl and Geddon's suggestion and sealed the prince's soul in 2 magic items. Jarl and Geddon guarded the prince separately. From then on, Prince Thunderin could not see the light of day and could not see Asher again. He did not have the chance to express his love. Year 36 of the War of the Dominators, the realm of wind was completely destroyed, and the wind elementals all fled. Year 60 of the War of the Dominators, the Titans once again came to this world and sealed all the elementals that rebelled against the Titans. The War of the Dominators ended. At this point, Duque sighed. Those who can save the prince will receive the prince's test and blessing. And the content of Thunderance, Thunder Fury, Blessed Sword of the Wind Seeker, blessing is, Hero, may you have a love that you will not regret. Chapter 1152. Sob sob sob. Women were more emotional. When they heard that the Wind Prince Thunderin had not been able to see his lover for 25,000 years, Duque's lovers all felt emotional. This was especially so for Tyrant. She knew too well the loneliness of waiting alone for such a long time with so little hope that it was almost negligible. Unknowingly, Tyrant had tightened her grip on Duque's other arm. Sob sob sob. It was rare that Gavin Rad, a noble paladin who was always smiling, actually had red eyes. Yes, I understand. For love that I will never regret. It's time for me to bring Emily home. It's my fault, I shouldn't have made her wait for me for so long. Gavin Rad brushed away the hair on his forehead that was wet from the intense battle, then turned around, leaving Duque and the girls with a glorious view of his back. As they watched him stride away, almost everyone had the same thought. Gavin Rad was indeed a good man who dared to take responsibility for his actions. It seemed like the world was about to put on a good show of lovers getting together. At this moment, Elugia spoke up, a little confused. Wait. Why do I remember that Gavin Rad is already married, and his wife's name isn't Emily? The atmosphere suddenly fell silent. At that moment all the girls looked at Duque. Wait. What does Gavin Rad's death have to do with me? Guilty, Duque quickly typed with both hands to prove his innocence. Oh no, he raised both hands to prove his innocence. It's all your fault for teaching Gavin Rad the wrong way. Queen Sylvie directly sentenced Duque to death. Duque felt wronged. He did not expect that giving the wind sword would cause him to be implicated. Could it be that he had to risk the wrath of all the warriors, thieves and paladins in the world just to steal this divine sword? Just saying. For a moment, Duque felt as if he could feel the resentful gazes of his companions who had only obtained half of the skull of imprisonment of the Wind Seeker. Sigh. He thought back to the time when he picked up Azanatha's warblade, that no one wanted. He would trade it to the thieves he met and enjoy the pleasure of being scolded, but the other party could not do anything to him. Sigh. I really am a mage of noble character and unquestionable integrity. Speaking of which, he had killed 6 of Ragnaros's subordinates in one go. Even with Lager's vast army he would still feel the pinch. Duque wasn't too worried about the upcoming battle. Now, Duque could enjoy the pleasure of touching corpses to his heart's content. The first boss dropped a Cenarian boots, and adding the drops from the minions there were Cenarian brand helmet, gloves, belt and bracers. In a single breath, he had armed Brol Bearskin, a poor worker. Duque said proudly, hee, look at how red I am. None of the items I looted went to waste. Before he could finish, Jaina pinched his waist. Aren't you embarrassed? Do you dare to look Sister Kalia in the eye? The weather is so good today. There were no clouds in the sky. Nonsense. How could there be clouds on the ceiling of the cave? Duque looked left and right, but refused to look at Kalia, who was mainly equipped with excellent equipment. It couldn't be helped. When Lordaeron City fell, the Lordaeron royal treasury was also destroyed, and the better equipment was taken away by the liches. Even though Kalia was the queen, she couldn't find a set of epic equipment after she ascended the throne. After all, exquisite equipment wasn't easy to find. Kalia secretly tugged at Jaina's sleeve. Jaina, it doesn't matter to me. Don't blame Duque, after all, no one knows what spoils of war we can loot. Jaina said angrily, we all know that. But I just can't stand that scoundrel master. He clearly dropped nearly half a set of Demon's Heart Warlock equipment that no one wanted, and he's still pretending to be lucky. Kalia, let me tell you. Exquisite equipment can't be too much. At a critical moment, not only can it save your life, it can also save the lives of your comrades. Of course, the eye-catching top-grade equipment would make people anxious and want to call Yao Yao to report that there was a pretentious criminal committing murder here. Similarly, after enjoying the bonuses of high-tier epic-grade equipment or even divine equipment, it would be very uncomfortable to drop back to the original level. Originally, it would take 100 frost arrows to deplete the mana, but now it would be useless after 80 shots. How could they get used to it? Duque also knew that his hands were black, and hurriedly swore that if he touched the corpse again he would chop off his hands. He ran over and hugged Kalia when no one was looking and blew hot air into her ear. "Kalia, don't worry. After we defeat Ragnaros, we still have to go to Blackwing's nest to find trouble with Nefarian. When that time comes we will have better equipment." Since the new year, there had been a rare opportunity to be alone. Her Majesty, the Queen of Lordaeron, was hugged by Duque's slender waist. Of course she would listen to whatever Duque said. "Well, as long as everyone is safe, I don't care about anything else." Sigh. That's the good thing about girls. Duque couldn't help but glance at Tyrant. He had really led the High Priest astray. After killing the 6 bosses, the situation suddenly opened up. The powerhouses of the Alliance had more important things to do. "Master, is that right?" Vanessa stood in front of a 10-meter square flame rune, and raised the bottle in her hand that was emitting a blue glow. "Yes, pour it down." Duque nodded. What was in the bottle was no ordinary thing. It was the water essence of Duke Hydraxis, who had obtained the water elemental energy of Hydraxia. After killing the leader of the Molten Core, and then destroying the energy supporting the Molten Core, the Flame Rune would be able to shake Ragnaros' control over the Molten Core. That was not what Duque wanted. Duque, Ronan, and the other mages worked together to cast a spell, and built a larger 3-dimensional magic circle around the Flame Rune. As the water essence fell down, the Flame Rune let out a squeak, similar to the sound of metal being quenched in a blacksmith's shop. In the next second, 2 Breaking Dawn mages and a group of Radiant Moon mages activated the magic circle, isolating all the energy coming from the Molten Core. On the flat ground, a cold wind suddenly swept up, causing the other powerhouses watching from afar to shiver. Suddenly, the shadow of a huge water elemental appeared on top of the destroyed Flame Rune. It was naturally Duke Hydraxis. "Well done, Your Excellency Duke Marcus. You are more powerful than I thought. I thank you on behalf of the water elemental energy of Hydraxia." Duque smiled and took a step forward. "When I sent Ronan as an envoy, I said that we have a common enemy, didn't I?" Chapter 1153. Once the water elemental Duke Hydarsis heard this, his dark blue eyes, which were formed by the condensation of high-purity water elements, immediately shone with a dazzling light. "Yes, we have a common enemy." "Then my previous proposal," Duke Hydarsis said in a decisive tone, "we water elementals do not have as many twists and turns as you humans. You have fulfilled your promise as an ally, so we will naturally abide by the covenant." Then Hydarsis raised his fingerless right hand that was like a sandbag. A huge fountain with a diameter of at least 20 meters and a height of 100 meters suddenly rose behind him. Then elite water elemental warriors continuously poured in. They were taller and bullier than the average water elementals, and the strong elemental aura lingering around them could be easily felt even by non-spell-based professionals. They scattered in 4 directions in an organized manner, and then some of the weaker water elementals began to set up new magic arrays on the ground outside of Duque's magic array. Mograine came to the smiling Duque's side. "You want to do something big?" "Yes, very big, very big." The smile on Duque's face made Mograine feel an inexplicable sense of anticipation. That's right, before entering the Molten Core, Duque did say that he wanted to build a forward operating base inside. But it had been more than a month since they entered, and Duque did not mention this at all. In this place where there was only the seemingly eternal light of the lava, if not for Duque's extremely strange concept of time, probably no one else besides Tyrant, who believed in the moon goddess, would be able to figure out time. Yet, Duque's timing was shockingly accurate. Mograine and the others had almost forgotten about the forward operating base. Now, it seemed that they had to kill the opponent's leader and snatch the energy node of this underground space before they could open a base. 15 minutes later, when more than 2,000 water elementals had tossed around the surroundings, the powerhouses of the Alliance were pleasantly surprised to find that the surrounding environment within a radius of 3 kilometers had really changed. Even with Duque's wide domain ice barrier, to resist the dust and lower the temperature, the air was still a little bad. Because inside the shield, there was no way to avoid Duque's rich mana. Now that the surrounding water elementals had erected a huge water elemental shield, the air instantly became fresh and natural. Because the water element that Hydacia used was the most basic water element in nature, which was different from the water element that Duque transferred from the element's realm using his magic energy. That was not all. Duque and the others immediately opened a medium-sized teleportation gate. The first to be teleported over was an entire group of Dalajan mages. They immediately got to work and prepared an even bigger portal. Duque didn't do anything. Ronan was the one controlling the portal's magic formation. After fiddling with it for a long time, the portal was ready. A large number of dwarves and gnome craftsmen and mechanics drove a large number of strange machines through the portal. One had to know that the amount of mana required for teleportation was proportional to the weight and volume of the object being teleported, as well as the strength of the life form. The mana used to teleport this group of troops. Just look at the high-purity magic crystals that were priceless a moment ago turning into dull crystals that were casually thrown to the side, and it was obvious how terrifying it was. The master craftsman Jurbin greeted Magni, and led his gnome engineering team to a suitable place under the protection of the water elemental troops to set up the machinery. At this time Duke Hadasis came over. He bowed slightly. The first fulcrum has been set up. The Hadasia assault team is on standby. Once you have rested, you can set off to the next flame rune location. Duque nodded. Although we really want to destroy all the flame runes in the molten core as soon as possible, I don't recommend splitting up or setting off immediately. It's fine. Hadasia has been waiting for the chance for revenge for 25,000 years. I don't care about this moment. Leave the protection to us. Please rest well. At this time, Jaina came over and pulled on Duque's sleeve. Hey, don't you think there's anything different here? Jaina pointed at her mage's peak. There's nothing different. It's still tall and straight. Duque stopped halfway through his sentence. It was indeed a little horrible to look at. Originally, Jaina's mage's peak looked like a white steamed bun. It was big and white, but now it looked black. It was like a black cornbread made from the skin of wheat. Duque's heart ached when he saw it. So he eagerly went to Duke Hadasis and made a small request. The Alliance's hero squad started setting up camp. It was a large lava pillar that rose from the ground all the way to the top of the lava. Close to 30 people from the hero squad set up camp around the pillar. When it came to enjoyment, Duque was definitely at the level of corruption and depravity. He could make things difficult for anyone but himself. Duque chanted an incantation, and according to the small authority he got from Hadasis, he made the land that was already occupied by water elementals spurt out a small spring. Duque grasped the air with his left hand, and pure arcane energy ground the pillar at high speed. The base of the pillar, which was originally sloping at a 45-degree angle, was forcefully carved out into terraced ponds that looked like terraces. Duque waved his right hand and a strong wind blew, sending the ground sand and stones flying. When the clean and warm spring water filled the ponds, the heroines all let out sounds of admiration. Wow, it's so beautiful. Look at this side of the pond. It's actually been polished so smoothly, and there's not a single scratch. Yes. Duque, if you can't continue being a mage, you can consider becoming a craftsman in my palace. It had to be said that a place that was like a hot spring park was definitely a great miracle in the molten core, which was filled with lava, sparks, and hot air. Duque had used his memories of the hot spring hotel he had been to before he transmigrated to create a battlefield hot spring park, and it easily won the favor of all the heroines. Women were born with a love for beauty. Even if they had to stick dust on for the sake of battle and make themselves dusty, their love for beauty would only grow stronger. When the hot spring was built, they erected a tall wall according to their request. After Jaina set up a magical formation to prevent prying eyes, the women shouted and rushed into the hot spring area. Just as Dooku was about to follow them in, the pitiful Dooku was rejected at the door. It's not just us sisters who are here, Ilucia said with her hands on her hips. Duque, it might not be a good idea for you to come, Kalia said softly. Queen Sylvie was the simplest. She immediately put up a sign written in the common language at the door, "Perverts and Duque are not allowed in." Chapter 1154. Duque was depressed. I can barely fight the molten core and I still have to help you queens make a hot spring. Don't tell me I won't get any benefits after that? Is that even possible? Sometimes men were creatures that courted death. The more they can't get, the more they want. Duque didn't even think about doing anything at first. He just used invisibility. Cush trouble. Today I will establish myself as the queen of the harem. Duque tiptoed around the sign that symbolized humiliation, and quickly and quietly snuck in. The wall at the entrance was erected by Duque, so how could he not leave a back door for himself? With a light press, a beautiful revolving door appeared on the seemingly intact wall. Unexpectedly, as soon as Duque flipped in, a magical message came. In the hot spring, the girls were chattering and teasing. Men were discussing women. Women were evaluating men. This was a truth that would never change throughout the ages. Will Duque sneak in? Kalia asked her sisters in a low voice. All of them answered in unison, definitely. Queen Sylvanas added, I know that guy won't be able to hold it in. But don't worry, the wind will tell me he's coming. Sister Sylvanas, are you going to deal with him? Elugia asked. Of course. We can't give in to that guy too much or he'll have no bottom line. Queen Sylvanas was resolute. Sigh. I was thinking if Duque sneaks in, should I shout no, to lighten the mood, or don't stop, to provoke him? Tyrant cupped her face, which always looked pure and holy no matter what time it was. Her words caused a few of the thin-skinned fellows to blush. Sigh. Female drivers can't afford to get hurt while racing. However, unexpectedly, even after the girls finished bathing and playing, Duque still didn't come. Did anyone see Duque? What happened? Jaina asked the people around her after coming out. Ronan, who was in charge of the portal, replied, Master? He seems to have something urgent and went back through the portal. Urgent? What kind of urgent matter would make the commander of the Alliance personally rush over? Needless to say, it was an urgent matter. Black Rock Mountain was littered with corpses. The blood that should flow had long since dried up. The violent heat roasted everything that came close, regardless of whether they were alive or dead. There were thousands of orc corpses, but none of them had their backs facing the Blackrock Tower. There was not a single wound on their backs. All of them had died because their bodies had been torn apart by a powerful force. In the distance was a vast and boundless crimson plain. Nearby, a small branch of the tribe was desperately running towards the plains at the foot of the mountain. Their mounts, the Velociraptor, had long since died on the mountain, leaving only a few trolls carrying a few burly figures on the crudest stretchers. One of the orcs on the stretcher was clearly covered in wounds, but he was still shouting at the top of his lungs, Put me down! Put me down! I'm going to fight it out with those bastards. What are you going to do? You're courting death. So be it. I've had enough. I've had enough. Woking. Leave me behind, let me complete the last glory of the orcs. Grom, who was wrapped like a dumpling on the stretcher, struggled with all his might. Was that a roar? Was it a cry? Was it a plea? Even Grom Hellscream himself was confused. Glory? Is it the tribe's glory to be wiped out in Blackwing's nest? Didn't your dead friend Orgrim try to retreat back then? Good. You orcs are brave enough. Then I, Woking, will be the coward who ran away. Let me tell you, Grom, even if I have to bear the consequences, I will protect you from the Black Dragon and send you back to Sar alive. No, Sar. No, I can't face Sar. 3,000 elites were wiped out. It's my fault. It's all my fault. Grom's tears flowed down his face. It was no longer possible to tell which part of his face was blood, which was tears and which was sweat. Shut up, Grom. We agreed to punish the traitors. Even if we are guilty, Sar and I are also guilty. The key now is to leave here alive and think of a way to take revenge. Woking held a spear at the back of the team. His injuries were not light either. His left arm was torn off from his elbow. If it was any other race, this would be a lifelong disability. Woking was a troll. In theory, as long as his head and heart were not injured, and with enough nutrition and time, he could infinitely recover. Thus, after a bloody battle, everyone's injuries were about the same, but Woking's condition was the best. Revenge? Oh. There's a magic array here. All teleportation and magic messages have been disrupted, but I sent out a distress flare as agreed. Now, we can only hope that the Alliance will keep their promise and send a rescue team to save us. At this point, Woking's mouth was full of bitterness. The tribe that was once incomparably powerful now had to ask for help from their former enemy. This could not be more ironic. Suddenly, a terrifying roar came from behind them. Roar? It was the roar of an ancient beast. Grom was in despair. Damn it. That thing actually chased us out. It's over. Unless the Alliance gathers all the strong ones, there's no way they can compete with it. Not only Grom, but even Woking was in despair. He looked back and finally stopped. Yes, it's too late. Even if the Alliance bandits saw our flare when the distress signal is sent out, they can organize a rescue team to come over. They can probably pick up our bones. A giant red beast rushed out from the Black Rock Mountain toward the gate of the burning steps. It spread its huge red wings and soared into the sky. With just a few flaps, the shadow of its wings had already covered the tribal chiefs. It was an incredibly powerful primordial red dragon. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at Woking and his men. Strange things also happened at this time. It was clearly the most terrifying pursuer and one of the main culprits of the destruction of the 3,000 elite orcs, but its words were filled with the darkest despair. "Oh, no. Go away. Leave me. I can't control myself anymore. I don't want to kill you because your deaths will make my sins worse." Although Woking wanted to refute, "If you don't want to kill us, don't attack." But Woking knew that the actions of the red dragon had nothing to do with its will. It was also a tragic existence. Its name was the fallen Valistas. Chapter 1155. What Wajin didn't know was that Valistras was originally a powerful ancient red dragon. He was originally instructed by the Red Dragon Queen to spy on Nefarian, who was causing trouble in the Blackrock Spire. Unfortunately, the Red Dragon clan was clearly not made for covert operations. The Black Dragons were. This was like asking a burly Tauren to be a bandit and steal the wallet of a sneaky night elf bandit. The outcome was naturally as hilarious as it could get. In the end, Valistras was ambushed by the Black Dragon King, Nefarian, and was brainwashed by Nefarian's evil magic. Yes, it was like the whisper of the ancient god Enzoth. Valistras had fallen. Even though he seemed to still have his own will, his body had already carried out Nefarian's orders to hunt down the Horde. That's right. The Horde's early attack was very successful. Their elite troops almost captured the entire Blackrock Spire and almost killed the great traitor of the Horde, Rend Blackhand. Just a little bit more. Rend fled to another place called Blackwing's Nest in a panic, and the Horde elites led by Grom chased after him. Then all of a sudden he encountered this powerful and terrifying immemorial red dragon. In the midst of the chaotic battle, the huge and oppressive body of the red dragon suddenly appeared. Valistras' first dragon breath severely injured the Tauren chief Cairn Bloodhoof, who was at the front, followed by Grom and Varrock Salyafar. Wajin was forced to lead everyone to retreat. If Wajin was a traveler with the surname Du, he would have retreated immediately. Because even though he was seriously injured in the ambush and only had 1/3 of his HP left, Valistras still had nearly twice the HP of Baron Geddon, who was killed by Duque not long ago. And the fallen Valistras was originally the most famous gold recycling machine in the game. This was because he had caused countless teams to be wiped out in front of him. He had made players kneel at his feet and had their progress blocked to the point where they wished they were dead. Countless guilds had disbanded because of this. He was both a super boss and an existence that carried the resentment of countless players. At this moment, in a place with no cover, they encountered a terrifying crimson dragon that was half a step into the demigod realm. Even the strong-willed Wajin and Grom could not help but feel despair. Grom suddenly sighed dejectedly. "Ah, Woking. I really want to see the day when the tribe is truly revived." Wajin smiled bitterly. "Me too. Was this the darkness caused by the loss of all the flags? Was this the last sound of the tribal horn? Or was it the despair of having no way out?" The sky was so bleak that not a single cloud could be seen. The land was barren and lifeless. Looking in all directions, he could not see the slightest bit of hope. Grom stared blankly at the sky. "Bastard Duque, I don't want to owe you a debt in hell." All of a sudden, Lord Howl felt as if he had seen something in the sky above him. Is that a black dot? Or is it a bloodstain left on his eyeball? Grom struggled to open his eyes and was shocked to find that the black dot seemed to be growing at an unimaginable speed. In less than a second, it became a behemoth that occupied his entire field of vision. This is roar. A dragon's roar that seemed to come from ancient times shook the eardrums of every tribal warrior. Wajin raised his head in shock and glanced at it, then closed his eyes in pain. Because that was the color of the enemy, black. No one knew how many warriors of the tribes had died under the claws and mouths of those young dragons with black wings. Crimson Dragon and Black Dragon, does the goddess of fate think that we are not dying fast enough? Suddenly Wajin laughed wildly. His laughter was full of desolation. His two white curved tusks trembled under the sun, as if he was laughing at himself. At the very last moment, a shocking change that none of the warriors of the tribe had expected happened without any warning. "Roar, you? Onyxia? Why are you? Foolish degenerate. You don't deserve to call my name." "Onyxia?" Everyone in the tribe was dumbfounded. In their memory, wasn't this female black dragon who stirred up trouble in Stormwind City and almost made it to the upper echelons of the alliance sealed by Duque? Without giving them the time to react, the two ancient dragons, one red and one black, who were definitely the largest in terms of size, actually started fighting fiercely in the sky behind the tribe's small team. The fallen red dragon, Varastas, spat a mouthful of dragon breath at Onyxia. Unexpectedly, the black dragon, who seemed to be injured as well, nimbly dodged to the side, perfectly dodging the flames of the dragon breath. Even though the fallen red dragon had turned its long snake-shaped neck to face the black dragon princess halfway, the black dragon princess still dodged the dragon's breath as if she had foreseen it. Taking advantage of the fact that the crimson dragon had yet to recover from the aftershock of the dragon's breath, Onyxia, who was also a dragon, knew the weaknesses of her kind the best, and seized this rare opportunity to suddenly accelerate to the extreme. Her back was almost touching Velastra's lower abdomen, and her claws swept past. In a battle between dragons, it was absolutely a taboo to send one's back to the enemy's claws. However, if there was a powerful dragon knight on the dragon's back, then it was a different story. A golden holy light that could not be emitted from the black dragon suddenly dazzled the eyes of everyone in the tribe. Duke's divine sword? As old comrades, Grom, Wajin and Kane, who had just woken up from a coma, would never mistake it for someone else. As far as they knew, there were only 3 divine-level swords in the alliance. Perhaps they would mistake Ashbringer and Quell Azaram, but they would never mistake Duke's dried tofu. Because Duke's divine sword was too sharp, completely different from the 2 door-like double-edged swords. In that case, could it be? The experts of the Horde suddenly realized that Onyxia, one of the core leaders of their former enemies, seemed to be on their side now. This answer sounded ridiculous, but it was extremely close to the truth. Onyxia and Duke's cooperation had already severely injured Varastas in the first attack. Onyxia, thank you. Although I don't know why you are helping them, you have lightened my sins. The fallen red dragon sighed a little untimely as it began to retreat under the command of Nefarian's soul. Duke pulled Onyxia's reins. Stop chasing. You don't want to face your brother in this state. Chapter 1156. Woo woo. A huge dragon with a mouthful of fierce teeth let out a low cry like that of a small animal. This scene was as strange as it could be. The other side muttered, I don't have the face to see other people of my race. Shame. What a disgrace. On one side, the giant black dragon was obediently descending from the sky, and the tribal chiefs were very conflicted. If they hadn't clearly seen that the one sitting on the back of the dragon was Duke was holding a long dark blue magic rein, and the black dragon's chest had the insignia of the Alliance and the Marcus family, they would have probably turned around and run. Even so, the other troll warriors couldn't help but tighten their grip on the weapons in their hands when they saw such an enormous beast sweep away the sand and pebbles, and when she looked at them with her fierce and vivid golden eyes. Grom actually wanted to run, not because he was afraid of death but because he was ashamed. Looking at Duke who jumped down from the back of the black dragon, Lord Howl's rough mouth with fangs wriggled for a long time, and finally looked straight into Duke's eyes. It seems, I owe you another life. If you were an orc, you would have earned my life and loyalty. Duke shrugged. Unfortunately, I'm not. Wajin quickly interrupted, did you know that Nefarian was in Blackwing's nest? Wajin did not want to raise such a question, but Grom felt that he owed Duke too much. If a veteran expert like Grom made a big event that crossed races and factions to join the human race, it would be very, very troublesome. Even as wise as Wajin was, the only way he could think of was to interrupt. Duke turned to look at Wajin and sighed. I know that Nefarian, the king of the Black Dragons, is standing behind Rend Blackhand, but according to my understanding of Nefarian, coupled with Onyxia's testimony, I think that unless someone fought in front of Nefarian's highest throne in Blackwing's nest, with his pride, he would never personally attack anyone. Wajin was suddenly speechless, unable to say anything else. At this time Grom, who was still on the stretcher, waved his hand. Enough, Woking. I was clear about my identity and the mission on my shoulders. No matter what happened, the fact that the Black Hand brothers had betrayed the tribe was still an ironclad fact. Besides, the Alliance is using the Horde to restrain Nefarian. Aren't we also using the Alliance to deal with Ragnaros? Grom's open and above-board words made Wajin feel as if his neck was being choked, and he was unable to speak for a long time. In the end he could only let out a long sigh. Grom gritted his teeth in pain. The Horde needs the Alliance's power, and the Alliance needs the Horde's power. Please help the tribe this time, and the tribe will definitely repay you. As for me, as long as I succeed, I won't even frown even if I have to incinerate my soul. A man, a real man, a spit, a nail. Even though Duque had expected this, he was still moved by Grom's request. Duque smiled and reached out his hand to shake Grom's huge and scarred hand. Welcome back to the Alliance and the Horde. At this moment, Dworkin and Kane were visibly relieved. In any case, with the support of the Alliance, at least the situation would not collapse. At this time, Dworkin finally asked a question that he had always wanted to ask. Duque, is the black dragon behind you, the previous Onyxia? In fact, it was not only the heroes of the Horde who were confused, but the Alliance was also very troubled. The first time was when Deathwing pretended to be the Lord of Presto and almost became the King of Alterac. The second time was when Onyxia pretended to be Countess Katrana and almost stole the supreme power of Stormwind. In addition to strong combat power, the second label of the Black Dragon race was that they were sinister and cunning. However, such a powerful and cunning Black Dragon, and the princess of the Black Dragon race, was now tied to Duque's hand, quietly staying behind Duque as a backdrop. This was really incredible. She won't betray me now, right? She's my exclusive mount for the time being. Mount? The eyelids of several big bosses of the Horde, Dworkin, Grom, Kane and Varrock, twitched wildly. In the poor Horde, only the chief was qualified to have a wyvern as a mount. Alright. Comparisons were odious. When comparing goods you have to throw them away. Their mounts were dragons and so was Duque's. But wyverns, even if they had the word dragon in their name, were actually just third-rate subspecies of dragons. How could they compare with Duque's mount? As a tribe that once had a red dragon mount, the older generation of orcs was very clear about how big the gap in strength was. It was already amazing to be able to ride a 1,000-year-old adult dragon. No one thought that they could ride an ancient dragon. Not to mention the princess of the Black Dragon, who was a demigod. The kind of shock that seemed to dislocate their jaws were all written on the faces of the big bosses of the Horde. There was no difficulty in stuffing an ostrich egg into their gaping mouths. At this time, a terrible draconic aura rose behind Duque. Duque, you bastard. When did I recognize you as my master? Don't think too highly of yourself. I just deceived you and took the opportunity to heal my wounds. Today I will take this opportunity to rebel. Before the princess of the Black Dragon could finish her declaration of rebellion, a huge arcane energy palm descended from the sky and directly pressed Onyxia's dragon head, pressing her dragon mouth to the ground. For a moment, Wajin felt that Onyxia actually wanted to resist. She was on par with Velastras and dodged the dragon breath that was as fast as a gust of wind, but in front of Duke, she felt an inexplicable sense of awe. Be it her reaction or movement, she was clearly slower than Duke. The result of her hesitation was that her huge dragon head was pressed down by the magic hand and kept rubbing on the ground. Bastard master. You will regret it. You will definitely regret it. Onyxia seemed to be struggling uncontrollably, and did not notice that the way she addressed Duke had changed. Do you really want to rebel? You're going to tear down the tiles if you don't get a beating for 3 days? Today I will let you have a taste of the dragon taming whip. Duque raised his hand and a special 9-tailed whip appeared. It was hard to imagine that such a huge black dragon would show a timid expression in front of a small 9-tailed whip that was less than half a meter long. Don't hit me. I'm sorry. Master Duque, I'm sorry, I was wrong. The huge black dragon whimpered like a small animal. Chapter 1157. Under the watchful eyes of the Horde powerhouses, the huge black dragon shrank rapidly. Under the effect of ultimate transformation, in just a second, the black dragon disappeared and was replaced by a timid noblewoman. She clutched her red dress with both hands and bit her lower lip. Her beautiful face was full of a pitiful expression. She was so pitiful. No one would have thought that just a moment ago she was an arrogant black dragon with her nose in the air. If they had not witnessed all of this with their own eyes, anyone would have thought that she was a little wife who had been bullied, and not a ferocious black dragon. Grom and the other Horde powerhouses once again felt that their worldview had been turned upside down. The ancient red dragon, who was originally a righteous one, had fallen into the claws of evil. The black dragon princess, who was originally a villain of the evil faction, had become a human's mount, shouting the name of evil while doing things of justice. What kind of comedy was this? Duque did not give them more time to daydream. He directly opened a portal and said, "Let's not talk about anything else. Go back to Stormwind City and rest for a while. The Alliance still needs the strength of the Horde powerhouses." Wajin looked up and said, "Please allow us to contact Chief Sar." No problem. The entire Blackrock Mountain had been fortified. Nefarian had obviously put in a lot of effort to manage this place. In such a rich fire element area, it was easier to repel other elements. Nefarian also used this reason to prevent other magic messages. For others, it was really difficult to open a portal here. But Blackrock Mountain was not Nefarian's territory. Below his lair was Ragnaros's territory. Under the premise that many nodes of the molten core had been destroyed, Duque's teleportation became possible. Suddenly returning from the blazing hell and breathing the clean air, Wajin, Grom and the others felt like they had been in a lifetime. With a call from Duke, a team of priests from the Storm Cathedral ran out to heal them. There was even an elite team of thieves who sneaked into Blackrock Mountain to rescue the surviving orc warriors. Orcs, trolls and Tauren were all relatively simple races. For this, the Horde powerhouses were very grateful. After settling them down, Duque turned his head and glanced at the Black Dragon Princess who was shivering behind him. His body recovered a little. His temper flared up again. The person in front of her was clearly a human, but in Onyxia's eyes, Duque was 100 million times scarier than the demons of the Burning Legion. What do you want? Let me tell you. I'm the dignified princess of the Dark Dragon, Onyxia. Let's not talk about anything else for now. I'm only asking for the corresponding position based on my strength. Is that wrong? Onyxia's lips were trembling in human form. Duque chuckled. Of course, in the eyes of a certain female dragon, it was a sinister grin. If not for that declaration of rebellion, I might have been able to accept it. However, the premise of rebelling was to be dealt with. Do you dare to say that at that moment, you didn't have any thoughts of rebellion? No. Onyxia was the first to reply. Then her aura weakened a little. Probably not. Come here. Duque grabbed Onyxia's wrist and opened a portal to drag her back to Duke Marcus' residence in Stormwind City. When Duque dragged Onyxia through the portal of the Duke's residence, the gatekeeping wizards and guards were stunned for a moment, and then immediately lowered their heads. Chief Steward Makarov hurried over and waved his hand. The servants and guards of the Duke's residence immediately retreated from the rooms and corridors that Duque passed through like a tide. Onyxia was dragged away like a weak girl. She seemed to have forgotten that even in her human form, she still had the power of a dragon that could kill mortals in seconds. In her perception, Duque's strength was so insignificant that she could tear this seemingly weak human wizard into pieces with just a little bit of force. She knew very well what would happen to her if she followed him. As arrogant as she was, she also had the urge to break free from this restraint. During the days when she was separated from Duque, she even secretly studied soul magic. A magic layman like Turalian could not monitor her at all. She had already found and obtained what she wanted. It was a soul counter-magic that originated from ancient times. As long as Duque did not control her in the first 3 seconds of her casting, she could directly attack Duque's soul, and then obtain victory in a direct confrontation between souls. She could even turn around and control Duque's soul. At that time, all the humiliation she had endured, all the torture she had suffered, could all be avenged in one go. Yes, just that one flaw. That one opportunity. However, at this moment she bit her lip and was dragged away like a puppet. When they finally reached the bedroom, Duque closed the door and threw her to the ground. She knelt in fear. Of course, she knew that the level of magic protection here was far inferior to that of Duque's old nest, Karazhan. She even felt countless times that she could destroy Duque at any time. But every time she wanted to do it, she would think of the magical scene of Duque's resurrection, at the Lake of Lovers. That was not simply immortality, but a magical power that was more similar to time reversal. If it was really time magic, then for Onyxia, it would be truly unsolvable. Failure had made her a little cowardly, and she began to constantly tell herself, I can't act rashly before I grasp the secret that he cannot be destroyed. She did not realize that it was her cowardly attitude that caused her to lose the courage to resist Duke and continue to succumb to him. It was like an elephant in a Thai zoo. Many tourists expressed surprise that an elephant weighing 7 or 8 tons would be chained by a chain the size of a thumb. In fact, elephants had experienced countless struggles against the chains when they were young and failed miserably. As a result, when they grew up, they still subconsciously believed that they could not break free from such chains. As soon as Duque approached, Onyxia subconsciously shrank toward the wall. Unknowingly, her knees were against the corner of the wall, and her chest and face were pressed against the cold wall. What welcomed her was not a whip, but a gentle touch. Duque said softly, Idiot, actually being my mount is your ultimate salvation. In the spiritual realm, Duque once again transmitted the video processed by the system into the Princess of the Black Dragon's mind. It was a realistic image after a lot of post-processing by the system. She saw her dragon head being hung on the gate of Stormwind City again and again. She clearly saw the despair and final ferociousness on her dragon face. Is this my ultimate fate in other timelines? A teardrop rolled down Onyxia's beautiful face. Chapter 1158. In the movies before Duque transmigrated, special effects and no special effects were two different worlds. For example, the Scarlet Witch without special effects was like a psychopath when she performed. With special effects, she was an omnipotent mutant. Although the special effects that Duque sent to Onyxia during the psychic attack weren't 50%, they weren't clear and exquisite enough. It was more like a kind of confusing inducement. This time, no matter how she looked at it, it looked like something that came from the river of time. Onyxia knew very well why Duque had disappeared for 4 years. She had always been fearful of this peerless powerhouse who had conquered for 10,000 years and tricked the Burning Legion. Now that Duque had given her something, it further solidified Duque's position as the master of fate, no, at least the Peeper of Fate. How could Onyxia not be afraid? At this time, Duque's voice seemed to contain the magic of fate, full of surging power. Those who block the general trend of fate, they will be crushed into pieces. So what if they are powerful? What happened to Nethario, the Wing of Death? What happened to Sargeras, the King of Demons? There's also Archimonde, whose bones are still hanging on a dead tree on Mount Hyjal. Yes, they may be resurrected, but unfortunately, that would only be a deeper failure for them. Fate will ultimately be in the hands of mortals like us. Onyxia's delicate body trembled non-stop. Even though she knew that this was actually Duque's pressure on her, she had to believe it. Too many powerhouses had already fallen to Azeroth. This was more like a curse. An irresistible curse of fate. Onyxia felt as if she could hardly breathe, as if she had returned to the moment when she was struggling for her life in the Twilight Forest. Bang. Despair. Helplessness. She knew that Duque's words were more like a trap to deliberately make her sink and give up on herself. But she always felt that as long as she still wanted to live, it would be impossible to escape from Duque's clutches. Her body had recovered a lot, but she didn't have the courage. The short period of freedom he had in the watchtower when he had nothing better to do was more like the last illusion before he sank into oblivion. Onyxia suddenly understood why her mother had been hiding from her father all her life even though she was so powerful. With the left side of her face pressed against the cold wall, Onyxia's sexy red lips spat out a sentence. Black dragons don't believe in feelings, nor do they believe in promises. However, if a female dragon were to be bitten on the back of the neck, that is fatal. No matter how unwilling she is, she would give up resisting and recognize the other party as her conqueror. She would even be willing to bear the other party's children. After saying that, Onyxia silently twisted her neck, making her fair neck look even more slender. Duque understood tacitly and gently pushed aside Onyxia's cloud-like black hair that fell on her shoulders. Then he revealed his white teeth and gently bit the back of Onyxia's neck. That soft texture made it impossible to imagine that this was actually the neck of an extremely sinister and cruel black dragon. Onyxia's body trembled, and another drop of dragon's tears slipped down her face. However, when the dragon-taming whip penetrated the dragon's cave with ease, Onyxia suddenly let out a long and relieved dragon roar. Ho! From now on you're my mount. If you mess around in the Alliance it's like slapping my face. I won't let you go. If you really do something that I can't protect you from, I can only let the other powerhouses hang your head at the gate of Storm City. Huh? You may meet your big brother soon. He and I are not on the same side. Very good. Come, take my 256 styles of dragon taming whip first. Woo, both of them couldn't sleep the whole night. At noon, Duque met Wajin and the others. These guys actually became energetic. It could only be said that the big men of the tribe all had monster-level recovery abilities. Needless to say, Wajin was a troll. When Duque urgently called Benedictus to help him expel the fire elemental power in his body, Wajin's broken arm began to regenerate at a high speed. Grom, Varrock, and Kane were not much worse off. When the holy light healed their wounds, these guys actually cried out that they were hungry at 1 o'clock in the morning. This made the royal chefs of Storm's stronghold wake up in the middle of the night and cook for them for most of the night. These guys ate and drank until 5 o'clock in the morning before they fell asleep with their stomachs full and satisfied. Duque looked at them, who slept until 12 o'clock, and could not imagine their miserable appearance yesterday. Wujin also glanced at the humanoid Onyxia standing quietly behind Duque. Before Duque could answer, Onyxia had already answered, "No. After a good taste of the dragon-taming whip, I will be obedient." It had to be said that as Countess Katrana and Rosso, the princess of the Black Dragon was definitely at the level of a movie queen. Even Wujin could not imagine that this dragon-taming whip was not the dragon-taming whip. Her complex expression of hatred, indignation, fear, and submission made Wujin immediately believe that Duque did not completely control her. Only Duque, who was connected to her soul, could feel the calmness and submission coming from her soul. Grom stepped forward. "We have contacted Chief Sar, and he has ordered that the Blackrock Spire incident will be led by the Alliance, and the rest of us will fully support the Alliance's actions. So give the order." "Commander Duque." Duque did not refuse. For a true martial artist, not even a minute of rest was torture. Especially the shame brought by the death of 3,000 soldiers, they could not sleep well. Duque waved his hand. "Nefarian needs time and so do we. So, I give the order to kill the fire demon King Ragnaros first." "Understood." Duque turned his head. "Onyxia, you too." Onyxia tilted her head and snorted as a reply. Duque looked to the northeast of Stormwind City, where the Blackrock Spire was located. "Nefarian, wash your neck and wait to be slaughtered." This was different from before. When the fulcrum of the molten core was still intact, opening a portal was simply an extravagant hope. Even as a Breaking Dawn mage, Duque could not do it. But now it was completely different. With the portal, even if Nefarian dared to come out, Duque was confident that he could deal with him immediately. Now, apart from the Fire Demon King himself, no one else could stop them in the molten core. Below the molten core, Duque's lovers were still a little disappointed that Duque did not come to the hot spring to attack. When they saw the angry eyes of the Horde's elders who kept calling the Black Dragon bastard, they understood the answer. It turned out that Duque had gone to save the day. Chapter 1159. However, would the crowd ignore Onyxia, who was standing behind Duque? How is that possible? More than half of the most powerful paladins in the Alliance were here. Almost as soon as Onyxia stepped through the portal, they sensed the presence of the Black Dragon Princess. Unexpectedly, they did not sense a strong evil aura or will. Of course, the dragon race did not rely on dark energy to survive. But the Black Dragon Princess who appeared in front of them at this moment had completely subverted their impression. She appeared in her dragon form on Lover's Island, full of anger and absolute arrogance. That was the domineering attitude of believing that she could solve all problems with power even after being exposed. Now, no matter how she tried to hide, she could only hide from the orcs in the tribe. Not to mention the Alliance, even Wujin might not be able to fool them all. Even though the firebird on her body had proved that her body had recovered, she hid behind Duque unconsciously, trying to use Duque to block everyone's sight. However, her beautiful face, sexy body, and bright clothes that never changed made her one of the focal points of the crowd no matter how hard she tried to hide. She gave off a very contradictory feeling. Aurelia took a step forward, and the Black Dragon Princess almost instinctively wanted to step back, but Duque grabbed her arm. This was obviously a little rude for a lady, but Onyxia lowered her head. "Yo, Duque, aren't you going to introduce this lady to us?" Although the Windrunner's elder sister used the calmest tone, but in the ears of the Black Dragon, it sounded like a joke. Duque looked up. "My new mount." Duque snapped his fingers. "Onyxia, show everyone. Slow down, don't scare people." In the end, Duque did not forget to inform Duke Hidasis. "Tell your men to stay away, don't get allergic when you see the Black Dragon." A little helpless, a little sad, and a little resigned. After letting out a soft sigh, everyone watched as the deep black eyes of the Duchess in a luxurious red dress with black trimmings gradually turned into a flowing golden color. Slender black scales gradually appeared on her forehead and cheeks, glistening in the light of the flowing lava in the distance. She raised her snow-white neck and let out a long howl, her long black hair flying behind her head. When her waterfall-like hair disappeared like a dream, a pair of black wings with holes grew on her back. His forelimbs had turned into sharp claws and were covered in fine and solid scales. The red and black robe seemed to have fused with his body and disappeared without a trace. She revealed her dragon body, and a tail sprouted from her hip. When she raised her head, she had fully taken on the form of a dragon. Even though everyone was mentally prepared, everyone's eyes were still filled with shock. The Black Dragon was rapidly growing in size. 5 meters. 10 meters. 20 meters. In the blink of an eye, she had grown to more than 30 meters long. When she spread her wings, the wingspan was almost 50 meters wide. The ceiling formed by the lava was at least 300 meters high, but the moment she grew in size, everyone had the illusion that she would trample through the solid rock floor, break through the ceiling that was equivalent to more than 100 stories high, and smash the huge stone pillars supporting the cave. Roar! The mighty dragon roared, causing the surrounding rocks that were not strong enough to fall along with the roar. Many people subconsciously tightened their grip on the weapons in their hands. But in the next moment, the dumbfounded Alliance heroes were amused by Onyxia's equipment. The tailor-made armor on her chest with the emblems of the Alliance and the Marcus family was fine, but the most amusing thing was still the seat at the back of her neck and the long reins. It seemed that Duque had treated the dignified black dragon princess as a large griffin. Queen, she walked up and put one hand on Duque's shoulder. What a great mount! My dear Duque, why don't you give her to me? Before Duke could reply, Onyxia had already let out a roar and spoke in the common tongue. I'll eat you. Duque's eyes flashed and he said sternly, What did you say? Onyxia's dragon neck shrank and she began to use a roundabout strategy. No. I refuse to let anyone other than you ride on my back. Not even your woman. Otherwise, I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself and eat her. Queen, she did not care and turned to look at Duque, blinking her right eye. Such a disobedient mount. Why don't we kill it? Kill it? Tyrande raised her hand in agreement. Kill it, the girls said in unison. Onyxia was trembling non-stop. Yes, good idea. The dragon head can be placed in the Iron Furnace Castle Adventurers Association. Magni agreed loudly. But as soon as he finished speaking, Jurbin knocked him on the back of the head. He turned. Why did you knock me? The dwarf craftsman put his hands on his hips. This is Marcus's family matter, why are you interrupting? Can't I tease her? No. Jurbin said decisively. The results were out. Of course, it was a group of heroines who happily rode on the back of the Black Dragon Princess. Onyxia, who was in a difficult situation, naturally brought nearly 10 female heroes for a ride nearby. It was fortunate that it was her. If it were an ordinary adult dragon, it would not have been large enough for so many people to stand on. After all the trouble, Queen, she looked satisfied, but the whisper of the wind almost choked Duque to death. All right. Now, let us discuss your sin of not attacking any of our sisters last night. Wait. Something was wrong. Didn't they say that XX and Duque are forbidden to enter? Wasn't this godly development no different from beasts are worse than beasts? Or did Queen she find out that I tame dragons? Duque had a toothache. Just then there was a series of loud rumbles in the distance. Everyone who had been in the molten core was familiar with this sound. It was the footsteps of the molten core giants. But they had never heard such continuous footsteps. Duque's eyes narrowed. He flipped and jumped on Onyxia's back. Pippi dragon, let's go. Onyxia's yellow pupils rolled at Duque. Then she flapped her wings and flew into the air. After flying for 5 kilometers, the enemy was already in sight. It was an army of giants that covered the sky. Giants that were 20 to 30 meters tall were rubbing shoulders with each other. They did not have a formation, and merely squeezed towards the Alliance's camp like a tide. However, numbers were combat power and destructive power. If this giant army was left alone, it was enough to destroy the entire camp. Chapter 1160. Even Onyxia, who had the body of a demigod, was shocked speechless when she saw such a huge army of molten giants. Not even a dragon roar could be heard. It was a long river formed by tens of thousands of molten giants, and among them were hundreds of large fire elementals, king of flames. This was beyond the limits of what conventional military force could handle. The tank army that Duque had painstakingly built up for 20 years was meaningless in the face of such a force. To a dwarf, explosions were an art form. Unfortunately, the cannons that used gunpowder as their main weapon of destruction were useless in front of the molten giants who were natural fire elementals. That's why I hate elementals that cannons can't deal with, Duque muttered. At this moment, the fire elementals noticed Onyxia, who was flying in the air. In the long line, an even brighter fire dragon ignited. The King of Flames had already raised their 3-fingered fire hands. It was as if there was a silent command that only the fire elementals could receive. Pft, pft, pft. Countless fireballs vibrated in unison. The next moment, Duque and Onyxia could clearly see a cloud of fire flying into the air, and the dim ceiling of the cave was dyed blood red. The cloud of fire did not stop, and it spewed up like a geyser. Hey, bastard master. Do you have any ideas? Although I play with fire, I'm not immune to fire. Onyxia almost peed her pants. This terrain was terrible for dragons. A cave that was hundreds of meters high was a very high height for humans, but for WRMS, it was just a matter of time before they could climb up. On the surface, the Black Dragon Princess could easily increase the distance by climbing and let the fireballs dissipate in the air. But this was the molten core, where the concentration of fire elementals was extremely high. The distance and power of the fireballs were several times stronger than on the surface. Even if she turned into a human, she would not be able to find a place to hide, and she would still have to take it head-on. She was very resistant to fire, but she was not immune to fire. Blast the rock stratum above us, Duque ordered. I don't know how to drill. Onyxia continued to shout. Cut the crap. Duque rarely used soul punishment when he was taming her, but he actually used it now. Woo! The Black Dragon Princess blasted the ceiling of the cave with her dragon breath. Bang! Countless stones of different sizes flew everywhere and fell to the ground. Duque's pupils constricted, and he mumbled as if he was sleep-talking. Wind! Went. Defong! Suddenly, a gust of wind blew near the top of the cave. This was a space dominated by the Fire Elemental Lord. Casually using the Frost Elemental Lord would only consume mana. With Duque's strength alone, he could pull out thousands of Flame Kings to fight against them. That was just asking to die. Duque had an even more ingenious method. Wind magic, which belonged to the nature element. This was a skill that even Onyxia, who had lived for God knows how many years, was amazed by. Countless stones of different sizes began to assemble at a high speed under the drive of the Wind Elemental Lord. In less than a second, the irregular rock fragments, big or small, no matter how different they were put together into one solid stone hemisphere after another as if they were playing with a jigsaw puzzle. These stone hemispheres were like protective shields that were layered on the outside, blocking the path of the fire cloud. Crack, crack, crack. It was a continuous series of explosions. Onyxia did not know how many layers of the stone hemispheres had been shattered. She only knew that she could feel the heat wave that was spreading and hear the sound of the rock stratum exploding. However, there was still no fireball that hit her body after 3 seconds. Did she pass without any injuries? What are you waiting for? Run. While Onyxia was still in a daze, Duque had already taken out a long whip from his interspatial bag and whipped it on her dragon's buttocks. For her, who had thick skin and flesh in her dragon form and was protected by thick scales, this whip did not feel much at all. However, the experience of being whipped by a 9-tailed whip in her human form made her awake. She turned and rolled her eyes at Duque, then flapped her wings and made a beautiful 180-degree turn in the air before turning around and running. The Fire Elemental Lords could not fly. They could only watch the man and dragon leave with their bloodshot eyes. Seeing Duque return on the Black Dragon, everyone in the camp heaved a sigh of relief. How's the situation? Mograine was very nervous. Not good. More than 4,000 molten core giants and more than 500 flame kings. It's not a force that we can handle head-on. Duque reported the numbers that the system elf had scanned. After purposely making it general, everyone was shocked. The hero team would need more than a minute to kill the molten core giants no matter how fast they were. 4,000 of them, regardless of whether they attacked together, even if they just stood there and let you kill them, they would still die of exhaustion. Some of the new members of the team, such as Sally Whitemane, were already a little green in the face. Woken suddenly raised his head. If we can't fight them then, Duque continued, we can only outsmart them. Grom patted his chest, making a muffled sound like thunder. Tell us, we'll do it. Duke Hydraxus also nodded. Duque pointed to the cave in the distance. That was where Duque killed Gehennas and Baron Geddon, the 2 leaders. You see that? Yes. I need the Water Elemental Legion and the strong people of the Horde, along with Sally, Tyrant, and the 5th squad just now, to hold this place. Defend to the death. Woken asked. Duque shook his head. There's no need. We don't need to race against time before Nefarian makes any real moves. Ragnaros lost 6 of his leader-level subordinates. Even if they have elemental bodies, they can't be resurrected in a few years. Since we destroyed their node once, we can destroy it again. You guys try to hold on. If you can't, retreat through the portal. What about you and the main force of the Alliance? Duque raised his right thumb and pointed to a mount behind him. I'll lead the assault team riding the dragon to deal with the leader of the molten core giants, Gyurmanj the incinerator. We almost became barbecued meat just now. Onyxia protested. Shut up. Mounts have no right to speak. The sad princess could only shut the dragon's mouth bitterly. Aurelia stepped forward. Are you confident? That was just a reconnaissance just now. I was caught off guard by accident. This time. 10 minutes later, Onyxia carried more than 20 people through the previous area again, but this time it was much safer, because Duque had created many phantom images of the black dragon in advance and rushed to the front. The phantom images that lacked the draconic aura could not deceive the strong people, but it was not difficult to deceive the low-intelligence king of flames. Looking at the countless fireballs in the air, it was more like watching a fireworks show that had nothing to do with them. Chapter 1161. Seeing Onyxia's powerful and agile figure gradually disappear into the distance, Grom's ambition seemed to be ignited. I don't know why, but I just think of my old friend Zulu Hid. Although the beastmen of the Dragonmaw clan had used dishonorable means to control the Red Dragon clan, that was a glorious era when beastmen could also become dragon knights and conquer the sky. It wasn't like now where everyone could feel the withering of the tribe's talents. Most of the older generation of orcs were killed and the rest were old. Among the new generation of orcs, there were few that Grom looked up to. Only Sal and Wajin were leading the way. Moreover, the professions were very unbalanced. Most of them were melee professions. There were only a few ranged professions, and there were no heroes like human priests who could recover. If the tribe fought with the Alliance, as long as the tribe could not kill the Alliance's recovery professions in the first round, it could basically be declared the tribe's failure. In fact, not only Grom but Agrima's great chief Sal was also anxious. The Rustwater conglomerate represented by the goblin trade prince Galavix felt that it was completely unprofitable to trade with the Alliance. After the Shameless Alliance attacked the Booty Bay controlled by the goblins chose to side with the tribe, which Sal accepted without hesitation. The goblins only offset the technological advantage that the gnomes brought to the Alliance. This was far from enough. The tribe seriously lacked magic heroes. At this time, a guest that Sal didn't want to see brought a proposal that he couldn't refuse. When he saw the real guest brought by the guest, Sal trembled and his mouth moved for a long time. Finally, he put his right hand on his chest and bowed. That was the tribe's most ancient etiquette, of course. Grom and the others were still fighting in the molten core and didn't know what was happening far away in Agrima. They had to focus on the battle in front of them. The Tauren chief Kane, who had recovered his spirit, continued to use his terrible momentum to fight against Archimonde. He directly rushed towards the molten core giant that was about to punch him. The difference in size was almost 5 times, but it was the molten core giant that was pushed back. The old bull snorted, "Slag giant, your strength is simply unworthy of the giant name." Grom leaped up high and cleanly slashed the molten core giant's neck with Bloodhowl. If it wasn't a fire elemental creature, this axe alone would have killed it. But it didn't. Even though half of its neck had been chopped off and its head was hanging low, it still swung its arm at Grom, trying to slap him to death. At this moment, a chilling stream of ice rushed into the giant's body, and very craftily entered the giant's body through the wound that Grom had created. The blazing flame heart in the molten core giant's body was instantly extinguished by this cold spring, and the giant suddenly stopped moving. After killing one giant, there would be hundreds and thousands of giants surging over. That kind of continuous pressure, if it was someone with a weak mind, would have easily collapsed. The leader of this group was a peerless expert who had been through a lot. Not enough. Not enough. If you want to punch me, you have to be 10 times stronger. Kane was very excited. In the Battle of Mount Hyjal, he was suppressed by Archimonde, but now the situation was completely reversed. A totem pole, a super heavy weapon, was used by Kane as if it was as light as an embroidery needle. The molten core giant had never seen such a way of fighting. The idiots who thought that Kane was holding a hollow pillar were all dismantled into stone in the next moment. Duke Hydasis' body grew at least 10 times larger, and the 8 or 9-story tall molten core giant only reached his waist. Not only him, but a dozen strong Hydasis water elementals also stood up. They were no less tall than the molten core giant, and they stood in a neat formation with hundreds of other water elementals, pouring a storm of wind and rain toward the exit of the cave. Soon, everyone realized the benefits of defending the dangerous place. The molten core giants were too huge. Even if they disintegrated into a pile of high-temperature stones after they died, they still quickly blocked the seemingly wide line of defense of 500 meters. The giants at the back had to foolishly climb over the bodies of their dead companions. Wuxia shouted, "Don't block the entrance, just let them squeeze like this." This was a place near the first boss of the molten core. A cave with a slightly lower terrain connected the main area to this side. On both sides of the cave were rivers of lava that were difficult to pass through, but this was only for mortals. As one of the fire elemental creatures, the molten core giants did not matter at all. Blocking the cave would instead cause the giants who had nowhere to go to take a detour, causing more pressure on the line of defense. Wuxia simply set up a pocket formation, or rather, a crane wing formation, while stalling for time to kill the opponent. The situation became tense with the introduction of an elite molten core destroyer into the battlefield. This guy's strength was beyond everyone's expectations, and even Cain had to show some real skills. The two behemoths fought on the blazing ground, turning the sky and earth upside down. If this was a street fight, it was estimated that most of the city would be destroyed in an instant, and several blocks would wail in the flames of destruction. The hard rock ground collapsed inch by inch. Every step of the giant produced blazing flames. Even the fire had a tendency to spread further with the wind. "You want to kill me? You're not strong enough." Cain roared. A tauren and a giant, their fierce battle made the ground solid. The ground was like broken waves stacked layer by layer, and there were shocking cracks full of flames everywhere. It was like an active volcano just happened to erupt under their feet. On the other side, Wuxia kept complaining, and the heroes could not help but smile bitterly. "Be grateful to be on my dragon's back. If it wasn't for the guidance of fate, you would never have this honor in your lifetime. I'm telling you, don't move or I won't be responsible if you fall." Duque held his forehead. He did not understand why a female black dragon who was born to play tricks would become like this after becoming a mount. Was this arrogance? Or some kind of distortion? Duque did not know, but this might be a good thing. Duque sat on the dragon's back on the dragon's saddle, which was theoretically the dragon's throne. The system kept scanning, and finally, a huge red outline of a human figure. The next moment, more red outline monsters entered Duque's vision. Even seeing the three red names, Duque still had a confident expression on his face. "Found you." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.